Hi, welcome back guys. This is your sensei, back with another fanfiction. This is the movie of What If Naruto Fell in Love with Kana. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Death leaves a heartache no one can heal, love leaves a memory no one can steal. Kana Alberona, slightly inebriated at the time of the quote. Kana Alberona was drunk. Tipsy really? Now, Kana she found this quite strange, because she never, ever got drunk. She could drink for days and days on end, and not once would she feel the aftereffects of the booze, nor would she wake up with even the slightest of hangovers. Tonight was different. Tonight, Kana was deliberately getting herself sloshed. Tonight, after learning only hours earlier she would once more be taking part in an S-class exam. The very same exam she'd failed 4 times before, while Mirajane, Urza and Laxus had all passed with flying colors. But that wasn't the reason for her inebriated state. The real reason she'd chosen the drink was because of her father, Gildarts Clive. It was because of him that she'd come to Fairy Tale after her mother died. Because of him, his fault, that she became a mage, that she subjected herself to hellish training and ridiculous jobs on a daily basis. Because she hadn't told him yet. Hadn't told him she was his daughter. Kana had tried to tell him many times, and each time she failed. Finally, she'd sworn to tell him once she made S-class. Only she never did. She'd failed again and again and again, and now well, she was almost certain she'd fail. Too many of these failures had accumulated in her mind to allow her to think otherwise. Hence the drinking herself to death. In her mind, Kana reasoned if she was too drunk to attend the exam they wouldn't bother to care if she didn't show up. If she didn't show up then she couldn't fail now, could she? It seemed like such a sound argument at the time, when she'd been sober. Now, only a few barrels in, the idea was beginning to seem more and more unlikely. 10 empty barrels lay discarded beneath her stool at her feet and she felt only slightly tipsy. To make matters the bar was beginning to run low. Within minutes if she kept up the grueling pace there would be no more alcohol. Is this seat taken? Kana looked up blearily, the room blurring as someone claimed the seat beside her. Blue eyes met brown and brown was the first to drift away as the mage managed a half-hearted wave. She tried to say something to be eloquent, but her mouth and her considerably high blood alcohol level betrayed her once more. No snot. Thanks, the stool creaked as someone settled into it. Then mention it? She caught a glance at him, for he was emphatically male out of the corner of her eye. Not half bad looking this guy. She half expected him to cringe back from the copious amounts of whiskey on her breath, however, to cringe away from the amount of booze she drank. Instead, he smiled and leaned across the counter towards her. I'd offer you a drink but it looks like you've already cleared the place out. He shot a sympathetic look at the bartender and slid some cash across the counter, affording Kana the rare opportunity to size this newcomer up without him noticing. The first thing she noticed was his smile, and from there, her interest only peaked. He was handsome enough, she supposed. Blonde hair, blue eyes, whiskered cheeks, a spiral-shaped scar tracking the length of his jaw, spinning round and round and round. She got dizzy just by looking at it. And then he threw her for another loop, because there was the matter of his attire. The young man wore extravagant colors, white slacks complete with an orange sleeveless vest, giving her ample view of his chiseled chest and the tattoo in full view of his shoulder. Her eyes lingered on the former a tad longer than they should have before they finally noticed the mark. Was it? She asked, pointing at his shoulder. The blonde blinked before he followed her gaze, indicating the tattoo adjourning his left shoulder and most of his collarbone. You mean this? The tattoo presented the profile of a great tiger, baring its massive fangs in defiance. She'd never seen the mark before and even in her drunk stupor, she couldn't help but be curious about it. This is the mark of Sabretooth, the blonde grinned. Sabretooth? She slurred. Never heard it? It's my guild, if you must know. A grimace of self-castigation. We're not very big yet, but one of these days we'll become the biggest guild in all of Fiori. A touch of pride entered his words, but he might as well have been speaking a different language, because Kana was no longer listening. Ha! The card mage snorted, covering her mouth with one hand in an attempt to stifle a drunken giggle. Big? You said you weren't big. The blonde's eye twitched. Kana mimicked him, unable to help herself. You're bloody hammered, aren't you? Am not. Kana hiccuped. You shut up. Shit. She really was, wasn't she? Perhaps she'd drunk too much after all. Had the room always been swaying this way? The mage extended his arm with a grin, and it was with very little hesitation that she found herself clasping it and shaking his arm in turn. Uzumaki. The mage introduced himself with a grin. Uzumaki Naruto. Kana Alberona. She grinned back, marveling at the feel of his muscles beneath her fingertips. Damn, but the guy knew how to work out. She let her fingers linger a touch longer than they should when he released her arm, delicately trailing them across his bicep. If the mage recognized her name, if he noticed her subtle flirtation, then he did precious little to show either. His eyes, however, drifted toward her exposed stomach, where the symbol of her guild was proudly displayed in all its glory. She was just about to comment on that, on his wandering gaze, when the blonde laughed. So tell me, Kana, what's a pretty young fairy like you doing in a place like this? Getting sloshed is what? Her tongue slipped. I have a test tomorrow, so I'm drinking till I fall over. Naruto laughed, and the gesture was warm as lava glow. Or perhaps that was the alcohol in her belly. I'll drink to that, he said. You should. Kana shouted with a laugh of her own, wobbling only slightly as she raised what was left of her barrel in answerment. Come on. Drink with me. I don't think I'd be able to keep up with you. You gotta at least try. Naruto chuckled. My magic doesn't react well when I'm drunk. What kind of magic do you use anyway? She asked. Blue eyes twinkled mischievously in the dimly lit bar. Now that would be telling. Can't you at least give me a hint? I could. When he refused to elaborate, Kana pouted. Well, Naruto laughed, exposing sharpened fangs. I didn't say I would. Kana blinked. Didn't Natsu have teeth like that? This Gie could possibly be another Na. In her inebriation, she gave the matter no thought. None at all. She'd come here to get hammered, not to ask his life story and all that prissy bullshit. The thought still nagged at her. Just what sort of magic did he wield? They chatted amicably with one another for a few minutes before the blonde ordered a drink of his own whiskey on the rocks with a shot of vodka. Kana couldn't help but be impressed at his choice. His was a drink of an experienced drinker. Not some first-time fruity beverage. He slammed it back against his lips and drained it in a single shot, gasping as the alcohol warmed his belly. He ordered another, and slid it across the counter at her while taking the first for himself. She caught it with a deft hand that defied her drunkenness. The blonde shot her an appraising glance as he raised his glass. This has a little bit of everything in it. Warned her. Think you can handle all of that? Just watch me. She knocked it back in a single motion, drinking the burning fluid. A few moments later, the room began to swim. Add to that the already significant effects of her own intoxication, and not even her legendary resistance to alcohol could save Kana Alberona from what was to come. She'd simply had too much booze, and now, with the potent vodka swirling through her system, round and round and round, she'd lost any chance of emerging from the bar in any form of sobriety. You okay? A blurry Naruto asked. She laughed, hiccuping. This stuff's great. Before he could protest, she snatched his shot glass away from him and downed it as well. Now Naruto looked really blurry. So did the rest of the room. Those people were blurry, he was blurry, everything was blurry. And maybe it was just the booze talking, but he was starting to look pretty damn handsome, just sitting there. She barely even registered those silly words of his as she scooted her stool toward him. This stuff is good. She slurred. Really good. I'm afraid you won't think the same come morning, Albert. He was cut off as her mouth struck his, her lips connecting with his ferociously. Perhaps it was the alcohol. Perhaps it was her ego regaining its former stature. Perhaps it was his one hand on the back of her neck, pulling her mouth closer to his, while the other started undoing her belt. Whatever the reason, Kana Alberona forgot about tomorrow's exam completely as Naruto grabbed hold of her and she him underneath his white slacks. His gasp of surprise certainly did not dissuade her either. Kana awoke the next morning to satin sheets and one hell of a hangover. The room swam before her vision, tossed about by tides of nausea. Her tongue felt thick and woolen, which was no surprise, given the amount of alcohol she'd consumed. Her head felt like Master Makarov's titan form had stomped on it, rolled over. Only then did she see the clock. Well past afternoon. The boat was long since gone. The mission to get herself shit-faced drunk had been a success after all. So why did she feel a sudden surge of dread? It wasn't like she was letting anyone down except herself by not taking the exam. There was always a next year for her. Sighing, she sat up, the sheets falling from her form. Only then did she realize she was naked. Shit. She hated hangovers. Hated them. She clutched at herself in disbelief, shaking her head to clear the spots from her eyes. Warm sunlight shone through the curtains, peeking around the blue drapes, exposing a series of hickeys on left breast. Despite that and the fact that this certainly wasn't her first time, the cadre mage flushed. Oh fuckity fuck. She'd gone and slept with Naruto, hadn't she? She'd gone and had a one-night stand even after swearing off any sort of physical relationship a year after losing her virginity to Gray. She'd woke the next morning to find his stripping friend gone, without so much as a word of goodbye. Things had been awkward ever since, and now she had gone and done the same thing, only to wake up alone. Stupid. Stupid girl. She berated her elf as she struggled to rise, searching for her garments amongst the pristine sheets of the bed. Sworn off having again after the— Oh, you're awake? Kana froze as Naruto rounded the corner, clad in an orange bathrobe. She might have found it funny, were it not for the realization that she'd slept with a complete and total stranger. A damned sexy stranger. The longer she gave the matter thought, the less she came to care about that, however. Becuse, he was still here. He hadn't left her. Hell, he'd given her the excuse she needed to skimp out on the exam. Tears stung at her eyes and she dashed them with the back of a hand without a second thought. Good morning, she said lamely, sheepishly, feeling silly for almost crying in front of him. Kami, she felt so awkward. Naruto displayed no such awkwardness. Wow. He whistled, suddenly, softly. Kana clutched at the sheets, drew them closer to herself. Is something wrong? Oh, nothing. Naruto shook his head, only for a dazzling grin to blossom across his face. I'd just forgotten how damned beautiful you were without your clothes on, that's all. Behind Kana's pale skin, the slow flushing of her face looked almost like a growing forest fire, and she seemed literally unable to catch her breath. She tugged up the sheets just to hide her eyes, just so she wouldn't have to look at those smoldering blue orbs. What? He was smooth, this guy. Fighting her and hitting on her at the same time? She'd never met a man capable of both before. Of holding his own against her while at the same time respecting her as a woman. She burned beneath his gaze, color rising in her cheeks, red as a rose. Damn it all, he's making me warm. But was he really worth missing the exam? Hell yes he is. A tiny voice in Kana's head reminded her of her promise to Lucy, but she shrieked at it and it retreated into a corner, cowering. Despair filled her again, dark clouds blurring and warping her vision until the room seemed at the bottom of a stormy Red Sea. She shoved it aside and focused upon the man standing before her, drinking in every aspect of him and her surroundings. She could hear the shower running in the hall, could see that towel wrapped around his exposed neck, the mark of Sabertooth standing out stark and proud upon his collarbone, baring its fangs at Kana. Glaring at her. Accusing her of treason. Is it so wrong to want to enjoy myself? Kana? She blinked, pushing her sorrow away. Don't you have that shitty-ass exam of yours to take? The blonde said so simply she'd have sworn he was raised on foul language. Kana stole another glance at the clock, considered it, decided otherwise. She really did not have it in her to get out bed, hung over as she was. Instead, she shook her head. Not anymore. Wells hit. The blonde shrugged. Sorry if I made you miss it? Don't be. But Naruto persisted. I still feel like shit for making you miss something that important. His eyes lit up as a thought occurred to him. At least let me make you breakfast in bed. She caught a glimpse of his magic just then as he flicked an eager glance toward the kitchen of his apartment and clapped his hands. The lights snapped on, one by one, various appliances flaring to life and cabinets resting themselves open. Some sort of telekinetic magic? Then? She shook her head, dismissing it as nonsense. He probably had a lacrima in the house somewhere. That's not the point. Her mind hissed, reminding her of his gracious gesture. The point is he offered to make you the best freaking breakfast in bed you'd ever had. She thought to herself, smiling. He's sweet. Might as well enjoy him. Kana gave the blonde a coy smile and beckoned him back to the bed. Back to her, as her hands made swift work of the sheets, lowering them just enough to expose the smooth skin of her left shoulder and breast and a gorgeous body beneath. She could be awfully tempting when she wanted to. Why don't you come over here and make it up to me personally, handsome? She purred. Naruto blinked, eyes narrowing in amusement. Well now, I wouldn't be a gentleman if I refused now, would I? He stepped toward her, but instead of discarding the robe, he extended his hand to her. Not knowing what to expect, what else to do, Kana accepted his hand and allowed herself to be led from the bed. The sound of running water grew loud in her ears, drowning out all else. By the time she realized what he intended, he'd already slipped the robe from his shoulders a second too soon, revealing precisely his intent. The shower was still run. Ladies first. He gestured grandly, helping her into the shower stall as though she were stepping into a carriage. This time, Kana did laugh, releasing all of her pent-up stress and anxiety as he stepped into the shower behind her, his lips finding the sweet spot of her neck. Her knees turned to jelly as he drew the curtain closed behind them. It was then and there as Naruto took her by the hand and led her into bliss, as he made love to her for the second time in less than 24 hours that Kana Alberona made up her mind. Screw the exam. What did one day matter, anyway? Besides, as of right now, right here, right now. She loved hangovers. Hello, my deceased fellows. Uzumaki Naruto, unfortunately quite sober at the time of the quote. 7 years of happiness and sorrow. 7 years to the day, and he still looked upon that night with bittersweet feelings. That night had been wonderful. Indescribable. 7 years to the day, and he'd never forgotten her smile, not a once. 7 years to the day, and he longed to see her again. For reasons other than sex, of course. 7 years in which he hadn't been able to spend every waking moment with her, with the love of his life. Such were his thoughts as he stood upon the hillock, overlooking Magnolia Town. His last job had kept him away for much longer than he'd anticipated, lasting nearly 3 months. Now that it was finally over, he'd taken a circuitous route back here despite knowing others would ask questions. Back to his family. He'd forsaken his classic orange-white attire for the theatrical, favoring instead the colors of navy and crimson, a scarlet and azure. The red cloak and cape billowing out against his shoulders. You're nervous, aren't you, Naruto-sama? Naruto sent the speaker a heated glance as they moved to stand beside him. She was a slender, well-endowed young woman with short, light-colored hair and fringes framing her face. She wore a black rose ornament on the left side of her head. As always, she wore that cloak of hers, clasped together by a star-shaped clip, bearing feathery protrusions all over her chest, shoulders, blouse and shorts. The cloak flared out grandly at her feet, where it was divided into flowing sections secured by ribbons. She completed the ensemble with a black pair of socks stopping at her mid-thighs. By all rights she was attractive. Had they met in a different life, he'd have bedded her in a heartbeat. As it was now, he merely glanced at her in commiseration. Oi oi, how many times have I told you to stop calling me that, Yukino? The woman, for she was emphatically female, bowed at her master. My sincerest apologies, Naruto-sama. The sorcerer opened his mouth to protest, decided against it. She'd been calling him that ever since she joined Sabretooth. And why shouldn't she? He was one of the founding member of Sabretooth. Save for Master Gemma, he had been here the longest. It was only natural she address him with the precious "sama" suffix, even more so since he'd been responsible for her training. That didn't mean he had to like it, though. Well, he did like it, sort of. That wasn't the point. Mentally berating himself for the slip, his gaze drifted to the town once more. What makes you say I'm nervous? He asked aloud, fiddling with the gold band wrapped around his ring finger for the upteaten time. "You've been fingering that ring of yours for the last hour," she observed, brown eyes appraising him questioningly. "You only do that when you're nervous?" The blonde sighed. Partner or no, he wasn't about to give the girl his life story just because she'd asked. "Do you miss them?" she asked softly. Kana. "His family. A little. Do you want to see them?" Her gaze drifted down the hillock, toward the town gates. Okay, now she was pushing it. "Yukino." Naruto growled, eyes flaring slitted, pinioning her with a gaze. "Drop it? Flux could kill." "Jigo Monosai, senpai." Huffing, the blonde returned his attention to the matter at hand. Inevitably, however, thoughts of his guild trickled into his mind. Thoughts of Yukino as well. She was his junior, in more ways than one, having joined the guild only after many years of service. She was like a little sister to him. She had heart. Not a thing like the other newcomers. Oh, he got along with Rogue well enough, but he couldn't quite help but feel some measure of disdain for the Sting Yukliff and the 4 new mages. These youngsters had no heart whatsoever. Not a one of them. Not Sting, not Orga, not Rufus, and certainly not Minurva. If the master's daughter ever learned of his role in the support fairy tale, if she knew that her senpai was secretly responsible for its continued upkeep, he was good as dead. Master Gemma wouldn't just execute him for this, old friend though he might be. He'd kill him on the spot. They'd founded Sabretooth together, the two of them. Naruto had been one of the first mages to join the guild, but after the Tenru Island incident, he'd watched something twisted grow in the old man. If he had his way, fairy tale would be run out a beaten-down old bar. Naruto's secret funds kept that from happening. Fairy tale still had its new guild building, though it certainly wasn't new anymore. He still had Kana. It was the best of both worlds. Only it wasn't. Because fairy tale wasn't the top guild in Fure anymore. Sabretooth was. Naruto's eerie predictions 7 years ago had borne fruit, and in the worst sort of way. Tenru Island had been destroyed by the black dragon Acnologia, and with it some of the most powerful mages of fairy tale. If Kana had taken the boat that day with Lucy and the others, if she hadn't met him, she would have shared in such a fate. As it was, she'd taken charge of fairy tale, mercilessly whipping herself and the remaining mages into something to be proud of. It was only fitting given that she was the 6th master of fairy tale. Thanks to her, fairy tale hadn't quite fallen off the map, but it was still a shell of its former self. Ranked the 4th most prominent guild in all of Fure, its legendary status was now merely mediocre, whereas Sabretooth, once a small guild consisting of only a handful of members, now numbered in the tens of thousands. Whereas Fairy Tale. Thanks to his rare brand of lost magic, the blonde had successfully managed to juggle 2 lives at once and without sacrificing his magical prowess in the slightest. It was a strain to maintain, however, as he'd done for the last 7 years. The strain was unimaginable. He couldn't see his family nearly as much as he wanted. Couldn't kiss the woman he loved. Couldn't hold her in his arms and whisper away all her fears. He'd had to battle some increasingly vivid dreams as of late. But dreams weren't enough, not anymore. So the solution was obvious. Yes? Go and see them. Hold them both and tell them how much he loved them. Simple enough, right? Wrong. Master Gemma had strictly forbidden relationships between guilds. To make skies roar, to make earth boil, to make the seas silent. That is Sabretooth, such were his words. We've no place for weaklings here, my old friend, or have you forgotten our promise? To court the feelings of someone outside Sabretooth is to risk excommunication from Fure's greatest guild. Do you want that? Naruto most certainly did not want that. If you truly long for companionship, however, you may have the hand of my daughter, Minurva. But Naruto didn't want Minurva, though the latter very much wanted him. Marrying the master's daughter was simply another way of shackling himself to the guild he'd once loved. He wanted Kana, damn it. Marrying her had been the best thing he'd ever done. Sure, they fought sometimes, and yes, more often than not she got drunk off her ass, but they loved each other. She certainly loved him enough to propose. Now that had been a shocker. He'd gone and picked out a ring and everything, and here she'd been the one to get down on bended knee and ask for his hand in holy matrimony. He'd said yes, of course. The fact that Kana gave birth to their wonderful daughter only 2 years later certainly empathized with his decision. Her name was Cornelia. Named thus after Kana's mother, she was little bundle of energy at only 5 years old and the pride of his life. She was also the reason he was contemplating excommunication. Too young to understand why her daddy kept disappearing every day, and at the same time old enough to miss him terribly when he was away. Enough to make him want his family around all the time. He tried talking his wife into joining Sabretooth a few years back when things got dicey between him and Gemma. It hadn't ended well for him. He'd forgotten just how angry Kana could get when he pushed her. They loved one another, but neither was willing to leave their guild, and it had put a bit of a strain on their relationship as of late. Honestly, that woman got more beautiful whenever he saw her. And he hadn't seen Kana in such a long time. He owed Yukino an apology for snapping at her. "Alright, you got me," Naruto admitted reluctantly. "I'm nervous. And yes, I do miss them. Very much. You should go see them." "Yuki, you know I can't do that." Naruto pushed a hand through his hair as he looked down at the prick piece below. "If Master finds out." "Oh." Her face fell, and her smile shattered like glass. "I'd forgotten about Master's rule." Yukino was one of the few people he trusted with his secret. They were two of the too few decent people in this guild, or so he claimed. Even Rogue, with whom he shared brotherhood, didn't know about Naruto's super deadly secret. He'd been forced to leave shortly after Cornelia's birth, for that had been when Sabretooth began its expansion. Shortly after Master Gemma discovered those 5 new mages, the guild he'd once started to call home had changed, and not for the better. No longer was it a guild of friendship and trust. No longer did the guild of whom he'd been a founding member cherish important values like family and kindness. Now it was all about power. Bonds made you weak in Sabretooth, and as a result, most mages were largely antisocial with one another. Many of those mages had sought to topple him from his position as Gemma's advisor. Many were now nursing black eyes and broken bones alongside their wounded pride. That was where the truth of his second lost magic came in. Instant transmission, he called it. The ability to teleport to anyone in the world, merely by fixating upon their magical power. Granted, you had to know that inside and out, but in essence, Naruto could be in 2 Almut simultaneously. At once. He was simultaneously in Sabretooth and Fairy Tail at the same time, using his status as a senior member of Sabretooth to escape unwanted attention whenever others became suspicious. He was also using it to kick some serious ass when the younger members of the guild came clamoring after him, trying to steal his position as one of the great 10 wizard saints. Trying to blackmail him with the threat of. It wouldn't bode well do for any of his compatriot Sabretooth or other Wizardo learn the truth behind his presence now, would it? But the spell placed an enormous amount of strain on his magic. He rarely used any of his larger spells anymore just for the sake of whisking himself away to see his family whenever the urge struck. Which was quite often. Which was right now. The longer he stared down at Magnolia, the deeper his desire grew. The deeper it grew, the less chance he had of controlling it, until finally. You know what? Naruto-sama? Screw the rules. Before Yukino could think to stop him, the founding member of Sabretooth pressed 2 fingers to his forehead. Even as she lunged forward to grab him, to stop him, to prevent him from risking his own life and possibly even excommunication, he was gone. A soft whistle of motion was her only answerment, and then Magnolia Town, practically lit up with the amount of magical power he'd just used. She could already feel his presence halfway across town, located in the Fairy Tail building. She sank to her knees in disbelief. Naruto-sama, I hope you know what you're doing. Mommy? Kana Alberona Uzumaki, master of Fairy Tail, and wife to one of the most powerful wizards in all of Fjord, glanced down from the eternal hell that was paperwork, as tiny hand tugged at her sleeve. Brown eyes shone with warmth as she saw a messy mop of dyed blonde hair peeking up at her, sharing her father's eyes of pure sapphire. Cornelia Uzumaki stared back at her mother's solemn blue eyes peeking around dirty blonde tresses, another trait she shared with her parents. She waited patiently beneath her mother's patient stare, ruffling her little blue dress with tiny hands. How many times had those hands reached for her, when she should have been reaching for her father instead. Sorrow swelled in the young mother's eyes at the thought. Even the sunlight, pouring through the open window, was not enough to cleanse that misery. She felt so alone here, sequestered within her office. Unable to take on jobs because of her dar, forced to rely on others for support. Forced to attend those boorish meetings. Mummy, Cornelia whined, tugging her mother's sleeve insistently. Kana sighed. For all her solemnity, her daughter was young and lacking in patience. Yes, sweetie? When's Daddy coming home? She asked. I miss him. Kana's response was to pull the child into her lap and hug her into her breast. Soon, she whispered. Very soon. How soon? Sooner than you think. Kana shushed, cradling Cornelia's head against her chest. Contrary to most women, pregnancy had done wonders for her. In the last year alone she'd gained another cup size, adding to her already trim figure, toned from years of taking on missions to prove herself worthy of the title of Sixth Master. To prove herself worthy, not just as a master, but as a mother. Mother to one of the most powerful children in the world. The child of Sabertooth's foremost dragon slayer and Fairy Tale's sixth master. A child of incomparable potential and their only daughter. She'd grown up in a virtually empty guild. Hopefully, that would soon change. Soon, once the ship they'd sent out to Tenru Island returned from its maiden voyage. Hopefully Ikiasen and the others were right. They just had to be alive. They just had to be. Lucy the other's father. The thought sent an unbidden pang of agony racing through her chest. She'd missed him. Wanted to tell him all these years. If he was truly alive, he had to know. He deserved to know that he had a daughter. Mommy? A WOI smile tugged at her lips. He deserved to know he had a granddaughter too. What is it, honey? She asked the little girl in her lap. Is something wrong? Cornelia's smile was positively beatific. Daddy's back. Kana opened her mouth to say otherwise, to assuage her daughter's fears. And promptly snapped it shut as the sound of footfalls entered the room. Brown eyes flew wide open and whipped across the room. Her mouth worked wordlessly as a familiar figure stepped out of the shadows and into the light, form still shimmering from the aftereffects of his teleportation technique. Her fingers flew to her face, stifling her gasp, her sob of surprise. Cornelia wasn't nearly as reserved. Daddy! She squealed, tackling his leg, the only part of him she could reach. Kana felt herself rise from her chair, her body slowly stepping around the desk. She watched Naruto pick Cornelia up, but regretfully, she'd ceased to notice their daughter. The moment she'd felt his aura, his magical signature, her world had ended. Months, years of sorrow fell away from her, replaced by a joy so fierce it burned through her body, leaving a gaping hole where her heart had been. Brown eyes met blue and held them there. Kana, what this must mean, for him to be here, with them. Knew the chaos his presence would cause, the hell that would rain down on their heads. And she didn't care. She didn't fucking care. Not even a tiddly bit as her lips found and captured his, rocking the blonde's head back with a jarring stumble. Her fingers found his and her mouth closed around his again and again and again, still aware of Cornelia's presence in their arms, but simply uncaring for her cries of ooh and cooties and whatnot. Drinking deep of him, she pulled away, pressed her head into his neck. Cornelia giggled in her ear, the sound sending fresh butterlives fluttering through her stomach. Welcome home, she whispered softly, tearfully. Welcome home. Nobody can beat my daddy. Nobody. Cornelia Uzumaki. Drive of the Dragon. Welcome home. Incredulous, the fourth master of Fairy Tale could only utter these words, could only press her head into his neck. She felt him nod, felt his fingers stroke the tangled curtain of her hair gods. She looked a mess this early in the morning, uncaring for the disgustingly pink bathrobe she wore. It was early, damn it. She hadn't been expecting him. She'd planned to shut herself in all day and curl up with a barrel of alcohol while Cornelia was on her playdate with Asuka. Fat chance of that now. She could feel her daughter's tears of joy as she clung to her father, her precious papa only reluctantly surrendering his child to the floor to return his attention to Kana, so that he might console his apparently distraught wife. Kana? he asked, suddenly hesitant at the sight of her tears. Are you all right? No, I'm not. She seethed inwardly. You stupid idiot. I missed you. But she daren't speak these words. Instead she verbalized her grief. You're home. She sobbed, unable to stop the tears when they came, scrambling for words at his approach. I mean you're early. Only moments ago, she'd been resigned to another 3 months of agonizing anxiety, forced to wait until the Grand Magic Games for a chance to see him again. It would have been another year of moments of passion, stolen when no one was looking, when they had the chance to be together. She'd forced herself to be patient, forced her raging spurt to sit by and twiddle its thumbs as she watched his guild rise to first and her own rot in 4th place. It was only the substantial wages earned by taking S-class job that kept Fairy Tail from outright sinking to dead last. But he was here, right now. Of course she wasn't okay. She was overjoyed. Yeah, I wasn't expecting you. Surprise. He grinned, pulling her into an embrace. Naruto, I'm a mess. She hurried to explain at the sight of his smile, as he placed a hand beneath her chin. You could have at least given me a warning before you. Too late. He lifted her gaze to meet his and she was lost in him again. Lost in those bright, baby blue eyes, that wide, dimpled grin and those lips, oh those lips. I'm home. As if to cement his words, he leaned forward with intent, placing a soft kiss upon her lips. Ecstasy. If Kana Alberona Uzumaki could only choose one word to describe the sudden outpouring of emotion she felt when their lips touched, it would be thus. Time had done nothing to dull her feelings for him. Separation brought them only ever closer when they came together. Pregnancy, well, that had only made her even worse of an alcoholic in the long run, especially after all those months of hellish sobriety. Kami have mercy. Now that he was back, now that he was here, now that his lips were touching hers, Kana couldn't help herself. All the restraint she'd been exercising over the last month, all the rage and frustration she'd kept bottled up inside herself for the last 5 years, all of it came pouring into that kiss. Her tongue danced against his with fervor, her lips clashing violently against his as they broke for air, as though even an instant without was too painful for her to bear. Because he was back. He'd returned, when she needed him the most. She pressed herself against him with ardor, ripping his jacket away as though it were naught but tissue paper. He made a noise of surprise into her mouth and she responded in kind, her fingers fumbling at the clasp of his belt even as her body pressed him against the wall. She cursed herself for wearing underwear as the pink robe slipped from her shoulders, exposing a body honed by 7 years of arduous effort, a form that would leave even the mightiest mage of Mermaid Heel green with envy. One that was still featured on the cover Sorcerer magazine weekly, mind you. She was shivering by the time his fingers unhooked the clasp of her bra, whimpering with want and need even as she dragged him back to the bed. Goddess, how long had it been? Too long. Her mind wasn't concerned by time and distance, not anymore. Only contact, her fingers frisking their way across his bare back as she ripped his vest off and tossed it toward the growing heap of clothes in the corner of the room. She wanted that damn belt off. She sat up even as he suckled her breast, leaving her fingers weak and nerveless as they strove against the clayso. So enraptured was she, that Kana almost forgot about the third member of her family. A soft cough behind them was brutally quick to remind her before they abandoned the rest of their attire. Mommy, why are you and Daddy getting naked? Kana's face burned with shame as she rolled off the bed, a golden glow eclipsing her skin. God, she was horny. Muttering herself, she equipped her old attire from before the Tenru Island incident, pleased to find that the garment was tight around the bust and not the waist. Being the master of Fairy Tail had its benefits, after all. Naruto had already secured his clothing by the time she thought to steal another glance at him, and from that glance, she inexplicably found her lips crushed against his for a second time. This time it was Kana who pulled away, reminded of their daughter by the tug upon her sleeve. Fuck, she thought to herself as she scooped Cornelia into her arms. We really haven't changed at all, have we? 7 years and we're still going at it like rabbits. Naruto grunted in surprise as Cornelia clambered out of Kana's arms and into his own, interrupting their heated kiss. He was about to suggest that she go find Alzak and Biska's daughter, Asaka, when he caught sight of his wife's expression. Kana smiled and the gesture was warm as lava glow, but her eyes blazed high with fierce fire. Later, her gaze promised, to his initial relief. You're all mine later. He could feel her hand stroking his back, sending silent shivers up his spine, aching. For her. He hadn't had sex in nearly 3 weeks now. A man had his needs, damn it. But the need for intimacy found itself quashed as his daughter placed her palm again upon his cheek, her expression grave. Daddy, her eyes blazed with excitement. I learned a new spell yesterday. There was only the slightest lisp to her words, thanks to her first loose tooth. Wanna see? Oh. Naruto eyes glittered with intrigue even as Kana's shone with concern. She was the daughter of Fairy Tail's fourth master after all. She tried teaching her daughter the art of the arcana, tried to impress upon her the importance of her own magic, but Cornelia was her father's daughter, a sorcerer through and through. Why, just the other day she'd nearly brought half the guild down on their heads. Silently praying for something other than an explosion this time, the young mother looked on anxiously as Cornelia scrammed out of their arms and onto the floor. She drew in a mighty breath as mighty as any 5-year-old could manage and inhaled, her lungs swelling with magical power. A violet magical seal burst into existence beneath her feet, causing Kana's eyes to bulge. It didn't matter how many times she saw that, it still gave her chills each time. She truly had inherited the depths of their magical powers. And it certainly didn't help that her father, a wizard saint, had taught her some of the most destructive spells he'd learned from his father, in addition to a handful of his own. Honey, maybe you should wait a bit? Kana pushed forward, fearing for the fate of her guild. At least until we're outside. No, Cornelia insisted, expelling a might breath. I'll show Daddy right now. Yeah, what? All that emerged was a plume of smoke. Naruto's sweat dropped. That way sauvery nice? Cornelia coughed in disbelief, her gaze turning stormy. Daddy, that wasn't it? She pushed a foot into the floor, as though determined to exact her vengeance upon wooden paneling. There was supposed to be an explosion. I wanted to show you so bad. Oh, Cornelia. Kana reached for her child. There's always next time. Cornelia slapped her mother's hand away, sullen, petulant. Baby, but her face scrunched up. It's not fair. Naruto calmly opened his mouth as a stream of black flames erupted from his daughter's lips and streaked toward him. Swallowing it whole, he gave a satisfying grin. Cornelia was by no means a dragon slayer. After all, it was impossible for a dragon slayer to truly impart the secrets of his craft to another human, even if she was his daughter. Cornelia certainly didn't lack for effort, however, offering her papa the perfect practice and at times a hearty meal, whenever he so desired it. And then, in instances such as these, a hearty dose of pride. Before either could reek tea, the dragon slayer swooped down upon Cornelia, enfolding his only daughter in a great big bear hug. That was wonderful, Cornelia, he praised. Absolutely wonderful. Soothed by her papa's words, she allowed herself to be consoled. One day I'll be just as strong as you are, Daddy. Kana and Naruto exchanged a significant glance over his shoulder. Just as strong? Unlikely. Stronger? Quite likely. At the age of 5, Cornelia's magical reserves already eclipsed that of most mages in Fairy Tail, and no signs of stopping were evident. And that was without training. Cammy helped them all if she ever became a full-fledged sorceress. The Magic Council, paranoid bunch of bastards that they were, would doubtlessly look upon such a child as a threat to their power and use her as an excuse to eradicate Fairy Tail once and for all. As if the threat of her parents' scandal wasn't harsh enough. Of course you will. Naruto placated, ignoring the harsh look of disbelief Kana hurled at him. You're back, she ventured softly. For good this time? Naruto blinked at her in disbelief. What are you talking about? Incredulity filled his every feature. Of course I am. But what about? Gemma can go fuck himself if he thinks that'll keep me from you. The wizard saint growled, dragging his beloved into another heated kiss. Cammy. Kana's knees turned to jelly and the desire to take him then and there was too powerful it nearly overwhelmed her with wanton need. If not for their daughter, she might have done so anyway. The thought of her beloved, giving up his guild to stay with them, was almost too much for her to bear, let alone accept. He'd helped found Sabretooth. For him to simply cast it aside for his family. So where is everyone? Naruto asked. I didn't sense anyone earlier. Kana reluctantly supplied her husband with the tale, where they'd gone and their plan to investigate Tenru Island. Supposedly there was nothing out there anymore, but this time she had the distinct feeling that they'd find something. So, you mean to tell me that your friends might still be alive? His eyes glittered with interest. That I might be able to meet them? Why, she cursed herself for the stutter. I look forward to it. His voice was mellow and unperturbed. Her heart fluttered. There's also something you should know. She took his hand and guided it lower, towards her stomach. Something else. Something important. Cornelia followed their hands slowly, unblinking, as the blonde's cheeks began to brighten. The slow flushing of her father's face was like a forest fire, spreading from head to toe, and she couldn't help but wonder why. Was Daddy angry? He didn't look angry. Was he ill? No, that couldn't be it either. Daddy never got sick. So why was he so red? What could possibly be wrong with him? Mommy, she asked, why is Daddy getting red? Does he have a fever? Give Daddy a second, sweetie. Kana soothed. He's coming to terms with it? With what? Cornelia pressed. She was confused. But not for much longer. The fourth master of fairy tale chirped happily. With your baby sister? Naruto nearly fell over. Wait a second. You don't mean you can't possibly be? Kana patted her belly with all the knowing of an expectant mother. It's been almost 2 weeks now. Cornelia raised her voice to almost a shriek. I'm gonna be a big sister? This time Naruto really did fall over. Oi! He exclaimed aghast, gawping at her flat stomach. You mean that one quickie? Kana nodded. You were the one who wanted to see me, remember? Naruto chuckled nervously at the memory. He'd popped into the guild only a month or so earlier, before Gemma assigned him another job. Their coupling had been brief, ragged, and anything but intimate, and he hadn't bothered to consider the consequences. He was beginning to regret that decision now. It was already difficult for Kana to explain away her daughter's parentage, but this? The cat was out of the bag. Fear and anxiety threatened to overwhelm him once more, just as they'd done when he'd knocked her up the first time. It was happening all over again. He was doomed. He wasn't cut out to change diapers. Well now, I really ought to be going. Oh no you don't. She turned a hard stare on him, her fingers closing around his wrist like a vice before he could place 2 fingers to his head. You put a bun in this oven once already, and this time you're gonna be around to take care of her. Brown eyes pinioned him with a gaze, promising him much pain if he resisted. Cornelia was looking at him as well, eyes flush with sorrow at the prospect of her papa's departure. He wilted like a weed beneath their combined gaze, finally recognizing the weight of his wife's words. Kana flushed, her hand falling away his wrist, caressing her stomach. You think it's going to be a girl? Another one? Naruto exclaimed aghast. Damn. He'd hoped for a boy if he ever got her pregnant again. Her eyes shone with motherly affection as she returned his gaze, as she took his arm. Once more, she guided his hand toward her stomach, and this time, the Dragon Slayer found himself unable to resist. There was the slightest bulge there amidst the muscle. I was thinking we could name her after your mother. Blue eyes bulged in incomprehension. You want to name her Kushina? Kana nodded. Cornelia and Kushina. It had a nice ring to it. Hopefully she wouldn't be a redhead. Naruto turned his head to stare at the blank wall opposite him, the source of all the commotion coming from beyond. What in the world? Oh, I. Macau's jerked upright as the sound of splintering wood echoed through the guild. The doors burst inward, pushed backwards by a powerful kick. Everyone rounded on the sound as a familiar group of mages stormed into the gold through the doors, a group of mages hated and loathed by all. They weren't from Fairy Tale, much to Macau's dismay. They were from Twilight Ogre. There are a lot fewer people here today. Thibaut sneered. Rather than a guild, what is this? Some kind of friendship club? Say, where's your master? He stole a furtive glance around the guild. She here? Good. That disgusting grin, anything, only grew. I was thinking of another way for her to pay out what you guys owe us. Sounds good, right? Mikau's heart froze with dread. Why you wouldn't? Our master, well you see said we don't have a choice. Thibaut offered a nonchalant shrug, clearly enjoying himself. It's a problem if payments are not made on schedule. If master said it, it can't be helped, now where is the little bitch? His hands groped at the air evilly as his minions chuckled behind him. Now, why don't you go find her for us, boy? We don't have any money to pay to you guys. Romeo slammed his book shut and stood up from the table. Why don't you lowlifes go away? Stop it, Romeo. Mikau hissed. Don't. Kana had forbidden them from making trouble with the other guilds. If Twilight Ogre actually made good on their threats, then retaliation was acceptable. If not, they'd just give the Magic Council reason to close down their guild. And even though they were higher ranked than them, too. What's with that shitty attitude, you brat? Thibaut snarled. To threaten us while our best mages are away, all cowards. Romeo summoned a fireball to the center of his palm. I don't care if Kana and the others aren't here right now. I'm not going to stand for it. I'll try my luck and fight back. If things continue like this, Natsu will never be able to rest in peace. He stepped forward, ready to fight, prepared to duel for his honor. Thibaut blew out a breath and the flame guttered out harmlessly. As Romeo looked on in horror, the man unshouldered his club and began spinning the deadly cudgel toward Romeo. Gulping, the boy tottered all of half a step backward, only partially succeeding in his retreat before Thibaut brought his legs out from under him. You've got some nerve, you little shit. He grinned, bringing it to bear on the boy. Even if you are above us, that doesn't change the fact that you borrowed our money, and now we want it back. I'll take it out of your worthless hide first. Then, once we've killed you, we'll drag your master off her high horse and haul her through the streets like she deserves. And once we've had our fun with her, he cackled lecherously. We'll find an even better use for that shitty little gaki she's got running about. Mikau shivered as a sudden surge of killing intent flooded the guild. Stop, he pleaded, his words directed not toward Romeo, but the foolish mage harassing him. If you continue, we won't be held responsible for what happens. Responsible for what? For this. Unbeknownst to Twilight Ogre, their ruckus had not gone unnoticed. So intent were they on tormenting Fairy Tale in their rare moment of weakness that they'd also failed to notice a brooding blonde had overheard their conversation, their discussion as to just what they intended for Kana. Flames roared hin in his right hand, and fury in his left as he steadily stalked closer. Closer. Closer still. By the time Thibaut finally noticed the scent of flames against his back, by the time he recognized his own peril, it was already too late. Much too late. The ogre swung around, smashing his burning mace against the face of the intruder. Naruto closed his jaws, neatly snapping the metal bludgeon in half. He chewed absently, swallowing the molten shatters as though they were but a mere afternoon snack. They clinked harmlessly around in his mouth for a moment longer before he swallowed them, consuming the burning shards of fire and flame with a contented sigh. Thanks for the meal. www. Thibaut sputtered furiously. What are you doing here? Clawed fingers closed around the ogre's visage. Thought you could threaten my family, did you? I don't think so. Naruto growled, the mage in his grasp struggling as he registered that his grip was significantly hotter than it should be, and if you don't like it, you can go burn. The grip was distinctly warmer than it ought to have been, all right. Too hot. Much too hot. Scalding him. Burning him. Naruto brought his hand down. Thibaut flipped backwards, his skin still sizzling as the saber-tooth mage hurled him towards the ceiling. But Naruto wasn't content to merely let him fall to the floor. With a rustling of cloth he vanished, only to reappear in the man's peripheral vision. All Thibaut saw was a rush of flame, a blazing kick careening toward his face. By this time his face was so swollen he couldn't even hope to form the words, left alone scream. He could only feel the wrath of Kana's husband as the heel drop split his lip and splintered his nose, the cartilage breaking beneath the powerful blow as he careened into the floor with an ear-splitting crack. Punk. Naruto growled, landing harshly on the man's ribs. Serves you damned right for talking shit? Eyes ablaze, he turned toward the remaining ogre and cracked his knuckles. Which one of you is next? Which one of you wants to suffer? Tibason. One of the ogre mages squealed in fear, struggling to revive his fallen comrade. Somebody save us. Before his comrades could respond, they each met a similar fate. One was frozen solid. Another was thumped by an iron rod. Still another found himself missing all his teeth as a hilt shattered his face. One by one they slumped to the floor, broken, battered, and beaten. Mikao gawped at the sudden destruction. Standing behind the fallen mages, an even larger group of wizards stood. Mikao recognized them, but even so, he failed to understand his eyes, because they were telling him lies. Not only had the co-founder of Sabretooth come to their rescue, but these guys behind them they couldn't possibly be. Che, we're gone for 7 years and look what happens. Natsu Dragneel growled, pushing a hand through his pink hair, the spiky mess refusing to be tamped down despite his best efforts. Bunch of bastards. Think you can mess with Fairy Tail and get away with it, huh? He delivered a swift kick to Tebow's gut for good measure, sending the man hurtling across the room. Get out. I never want to see you and your crew in our guild ever again, you bunch of bastards. Took the words right out of my mouth. Naruto nodded, risking a glance back at the pinkette. It promptly performed a double take. Holy shit. Natsu! Huh. Natsu whipped around, suddenly aware of the man's overwhelming confusion. Who the hell are you? He peered at the man's mark, the mark of Sabretooth, standing proudly upon the man's forearm. You're not from our guild. What the hell are you doing here? Naruto cocked his head, bemused. That's my line. Team. The pink-haired youth scowled, butting heads with the blonde. That's my line. Oh ho. Naruto grinned dangerously. And who says I have to listen to you, Gaki? Bastard. The fire dragon slayer seethed. You wanna go? Naruto grinned ferociously. Bring it. Karino. Naruto grinned as the rush of flames streamed toward him. Terino. Oi. A woman's voice cried. That's enough. All of you. All eyes turned toward the staircase, toward the one who'd spoken. Standing there against the rail, daughters slung against her hip, was Kana Alberona Uzumaki, the 4th master of Fairy Tail. She peered down at the Tenru Island gang, brown eyes glinting like chips of hard and frozen amber. She stared each of them down, silently daring anyone to speak up. If she felt any confusion at the sudden and abrupt return of her nakama, she did precious little to show it. Instead, she stormed down the staircase, marched right up to Naruto, and handed him their daughter. Taking his hand in her own, she turned to face the horde of Unaged mages, friend and family alike, and drew a deep breath. Welcome home, everyone. She shouted loudly, struggling to make herself heard over their cheers. We've missed you. Cheers, louder than before, greeted her. Now, before you start partying, I, as Fairy Tail's 4th master, have an announcement to make. The silence was deafening. F4th master? Gray whispered. Oi, when did that happen? It's been 7 years. Levi hissed back. Don't act so surprised because you banged her once. You knew about that? Everyone knew about that. Are the two of you quite done? Kana asked, silencing them. I'm trying to make an announcement over here. Oh, how she was going to enjoying the look on that Isabastard's face when she did this. Grinning, she pulled Naruto closer to the stage, closer to her, and when all eyes fell upon the blonde, she jammed her lips against his with the repressed passion of nearly a month. It was not without a supreme effort that she tore her lips away again, even as her body whined in need. This, she began at their questioning stares, is my husband. Before their cries of surprise could overwhelm her, she pressed on. We've been married for 5 years now. Holding up the diamond rock he'd bought her for utter emphasis, it was quite large. She was pleased to admit she reveled in their attention. And for those of you who want to know, I might as well tell you, he's a dragon slayer. Natsu, Wendy, and even the usually stoic Gajeel guffawed at the news. Others remained focused on her earlier admission. A certain ice midge burned with shame. Kana reveled in it. No way. Lucy guffawed from below the balcony. You got married, Kana? Brown eyes twitched. Will you let me finish? Hi. And this is our daughter. She took Cornelia from Naruto's arms and cradled her softly. Cornelia Uzumaki, named after my mother. That's right everybody, she's mine. Cornelia waved meekly, embarrassed by all the attention. Lo. The reaction was instantaneous. Gray fainted outright, briefly fearing that the child was his, and no one could hope to revive him. Urza, already shocked by the revelation of Alzak and Biska's marriage and child, was as red as her infamous surname, or nearly so. The entire guild was in an uproar, and any further attempt to describe it would have been futile. Suffice it to say, the overwhelming reaction sounded a great deal like, "You had a kid?" Her offspring secured, she turned her attention toward the last item on her to-do list, Gildarts Clive. "Yo, Pops!" she barked. "Get your ass up here. Right now." Gildarts meekly pointed at his chest, indicating himself. Doubtlessly Lucy had told him the truth. Kana sighed, relief and sorrow warring with her own inner anxiety. Lucy's admission actually made things easier, but she had wanted to be the one to tell her father the truth. The moment the S-class mage cleared the stairwell and reached the stage, Kana thrust Cornelia at him. Gildarts gawped, both at her and his daughter's sudden act of emotion. Abashed and ashamed, he fumbled at her, unsure of what to do with the child in his arms. Cornelia was of the same accord. She was still fussy and now frightened, uncertain as to what she should do. She'd never seen this man before. "Surprise, surprise. I'm your daughter." Kana said it as though it were the most obvious thing in the world, hoping she displayed none of the inner turmoil she felt. "And she is your granddaughter. Drop her and I'll chop off your balls and sell them, okay?" She finished with a sweet smile and a flourish, leaving little doubt that she'd do just that if any harm came to her offspring. Naruto shivered beside his wife, because now it was his turn and he suddenly found himself quite fearful of the woman he'd come to love. "Well, come on. Say something." Gildarts was too shocked to even consider the ramifications of his daughter's words. He was far too busy staring down at the 5-year-old in his arms, and she up at him. Cornelia risked a glance back at her mother, her blue eyes thick with unshed tears. Kana nodded gently in reassurance. Little Cornelia bit her lip, reluctantly stifling the whimper that threatened to tear its way past her lips and ruin everything. She was still afraid of his face, still terrified by this great big man holding her so very close, but her mommy's words were slowly clicking together in her mind. Slowly, uncertainty gave way to curiosity and curiosity to inquisitiveness. Could it be true? Did she really have a grandpa? She peered up at him gravely, stifling her tears so that she might speak. "Grandpa?" she asked softly. "Are you really my grandpa?" Gildarts' mouth worked wordlessly. It was like flicking a switch. He couldn't speak. He could barely even breathe. He tried to speak, he really did, but no sound would emerge. Though dim, he could see remnants of Cornelia, the real Cornelia in his daughter's child, bits and pieces of the only woman he'd ever loved. To think he had a daughter! The knowledge had been shocking enough when Lucy revealed it to him, when she blamed him for causing Kana to miss the exam. And now, 7 years later, he'd come back, to find his daughter married and with a husband. With a kid. She was such a little darling. And she was his granddaughter. Meaning, to him a grandfather? "Grandpa?" Cornelia asked again, her eyes still moist. "Why are you crying?" Because Gildarts was crying. He'd been so caught up in his emotions he hadn't been able to realize it. With those words, his body reacted. He hugged Cornelia into his chest, silently reveling in the tiny chirrup of delight she gave. Through his tears he watched Kana smile, watched her break down completely. He watched her sob as she moved to embrace him, wrapping her daughter and himself in a tentative embrace. In relatively short order the three of them were blubbering like complete idiots. And yet her husband stood aside. He kept himself well back from their little group hug, an odd emotion shining in his eyes. Content to remain forgotten while they had their moment. But not for long. "Oh, shit." Kana cussed abruptly, grabbing him by the wrist and hauled him forward. "Naruto, why didn't you say something?" "Well, I didn't want to intrude." Bullshit. Kana swore, her eyes glistening. Intrude all you want. We're family. Now say hello. But just do it. With that, she thrust him toward Gildarts. Dad, meet my husband, Uzumaki Naruto. Pride oozed into her words. And before you ask, yes, I met him at a bar. Best damned night of my life. Did I mention he's a wizard saint? Gildarts twitched. A wizard saint? Nice to meet you, Mr. Clive. Naruto awkwardly extended his hand in greeting, something a boy would do upon meeting a girl's father for the first time. But he hadn't met him first. He'd gone and bedded his child as though it were nothing, married her, and started a family, all within 7 short years. The room swam as the realization struck Gildarts upside the head, harsher than any blow. This little punk. As if reading his mind, Kana's hand strayed to her stomach. You'll also have another granddaughter in a few months. She added ruefully. So don't plan on going anywhere. So he's knocked her up twice now. And he belongs to another guild. Dad? Kana blinked. Are you? But Gildarts wasn't listening. Numbly, he returned Cornelia to Kana's arms. Then he brought the full gaze of an overprotective papa to bear upon Naruto. Something in those eyes didn't quite sit right with the blonde, so he opted to take a swift step backward. It saved his life. Not a moment later, the ground he'd been standing on erupted into 1,000 fragments, disassembled and laid apart by Gildarts' deadly crash magic. Naruto gawped, flames seeping from his skin as he propelled himself across the room and to safety. Silence descended upon the guild. What the hell? Dad? Kana gawped. What are you doing? Her words fell on deaf ears. You little bastard. To Kana's dismay, the S-class mage lunged for Naruto once more, forcing the blonde to throw himself back off the banister. Hold still so I can throttle you myself. But Naruto did not stay still. Quite the contrary. He hurtled forward, flinging himself over Gildarts and to safety even as the mighty mage eradicated another section of flooring. He landed on Natsu's shoulders, causing the pinkette to wobble unsteadily a moment before another burst of blue flames sent him screaming toward the rafters. But he yelped, alighting upon a beam. What was that for? Was it something I said? You know what you did. Gildarts roared, leaping up after him. I'll never forgive you. Never. Naruto blanched. Wait. He exclaimed, flinging himself out the way as Gildarts hurled a crash spell at him. What the hell did I do? Gildarts' response was to simply fling another spell. Please tell me. You married my daughter without asking my blessing. Naruto nearly fell off the beam he was standing on. That's what had him in such an uproarious state? Because he hadn't asked for a blessing? Arg. Why did parents always have to be like that? You were stuck on Tenru Island, he protested, hurtling a barrage of fireballs back at the mage. Gildarts simply obliterated the spell in his pursuit. Realizing that the rafters were no place to continue such a pitched battle, the blonde flung himself to the floor and overturned a table to act as a shield. Would it help if I said I was sorry? That's no excuse. Daddy, stop. Kana pleaded, grabbing him from behind. Don't kill my husband. Let him go, Kana. A deep, booming voice warned. I'll stop him. Kana promptly complied, and not a moment too soon as a shadow fell over the enraged mage. Naruto looked up just in time for his expectations to be defied. Just in time for Gildarts, lips frothing with furious foam, to meet his end. Just in time to watch him be crushed under a giant's foot. Naruto followed the foot and found himself gawping upward, a massive man towering toward the high ceiling above itself. Makarov Dreyer slowly raised his boot and scraped the dazed mage off his heel, allowing the flattened wizard to drift to the floor. Even crushed as he was, Gildarts still reached a trembling hand toward his son-in-law. Iljet, are you all right? Kana asked. Macau, meanwhile, had fainted. After smelling salts were placed under his nose, he jumped up and cried, How am I going to take care of Romeo now? Makarov walked over from his usual spot on the bar, nodded solemnly and patted Macau's back. If you become unfit to care for Romeo, I'll take him under my wing. The poor mage blanched. That doesn't make me feel much better, sir. Makarov squashed him under his foot. Naruto sagged in relief. Thanks, Gigi. Blondie bastard. Naruto whipped around, all pretense gone. What did you just call me? Natsu's reply came in a geyser of fire. Karyu no Hoko. Blue eyes bulged as torrent of orange flame plowed into him, lifting the blonde from his feet. Pain crackled across his skin as he found himself hurtled toward the doors, but only for a moment. He opened his mouth and inhaled. With a faint gurgling sound, Natsu's flames found themselves sucked inward. Naruto drank deep, greedily devouring this sudden and unexpected source of energy. Flames scoured through his veins, leaving him feeling refreshed and whole, resurgent with energy as he found his footing once more. Sucking up the very last bit of Natsu's, he gave a hearty belch and patted his stomach. Heh, thanks for the meal, Dragneel. Stop stealing my lines, you bastard. Natsu raged. And stop eating my fire. What the hell? How the hell did you eat Salamander's flame? Gajeel Red Fox demanded to know. The Sun Dragon will always be stronger than the Fire Dragon. Naruto wagged a finger. It's only natural that I be able to eat his flames, Gajeel-san. Gajeel grinned. Heh, I like your style. Then how about this? Naruto's gaze snapped around just in time to see the sparks surrounding Natsu. Lightning, integrating itself within the flames. Lightning fire dragons. Natsusan. Protested a young child with blue hair, wearing a dress that was terribly familiar. Please stop fighting. She would have continued had not an armored woman with scarlet hair intervened and thrust them apart. Naruto blinked at her, at the Heart Cruise symbol, emblazoned there upon her breastplate for all eyes to see, straining against a pair of overly large breasts. Holy! They were almost as big as Kana's. Clamping a hand against his nose, he hurriedly averted his eyes. That's enough, both of you. She glared daggers at the pair, and when the pinkette seemed contrite, only then did the fire dim from her brown eyes. I must apologize for his crude behavior, Naruto-dono. It is my fault entirely for not instructing him better. Please hit me. Naruto flushed at the unexpected sight of her bosom. Hit you? What kind of crazy guild was this? Speaking of crazy. Fuck. He swore aloud, his words going unheard amidst the clamor of the guild. I almost forgot. Yukino. He cast an earnest glance for Kana, desperate to find his wife and explain that this would be the final departure from the woman he loved. Ultimately, he didn't have to look very far. A tug on his elbow alerted him to his daughter's presence, and even as he reached for her, he found himself face to face with her mother. Blue met brown, and he could see the years in her eyes. All the pain, all the suffering, now about to be ended by his actions. Do you have to go? She whispered. Do you have to do this? By yourself? Naruto nodded, hating himself for every second that he upset her. This is the last time. He cast a sorrowed glance for the saber-toothed tiger upon his shoulder. If all goes well, I'll have the fairy tale stamp on this shoulder today before sundown. So many years had been invested with that mark, so many memories, so many emotions. And now he was about to forsake it, everything he had worked to build. And for what? Was it worth it? Was it worth throwing away everything he ever cared for to be with the woman he loved? Hell yes. And if you're not? Her lip trembled. Naruto shrugged. Do what your guild does best. He cast a glance over the chaos and the partying that had resumed in earnest. Kick some ass. She kissed him, then crushing her body against him. Don't get killed, dumbass. She hissed in his ear. When this over, I'm getting laid. The blonde laughed. I love you too. Pressing two fingers to his head, he deftly disappeared before Gildarts could pull himself up off the floor and grab him again. Naruto knew at the moment his instant transmission carried him to the streets of his hometown. There was trouble brewing. Just as he knew, Minurva awaited a few paces around the corner. Resigning himself to ignore whatever Gemma's daughter might have to say to him, he pressed onward, resolute in his determination to ignore the obsessed woman. Easier said than done. He resisted the urge to lash out at her as she clung to his arm, seizing it one fell swoop as he passed her by. He allowed her the contact but did not slow, forcing her to move through the throng of people alongside him. She was Gemma's daughter, after all. He'd owe the old man his everything. At the very least he'd pay the girl his respects and excuse himself. He wanted to go back to Kana. Damn her crazy father. "How have you been?" she inquired, her hand slipping through his as he unwilling found himself guided through the crowd. "Well," he grunted as she led him through a corridor. "Then why do you look so sad?" Naruto arched an eyebrow. Strange. Usually she greeted him with some obscure demand or another. For her to inquire as to his condition was unusual. He hazarded a glance down her. She'd been a pretty little thing as a child. As a woman, she was beautiful, especially in her revolving Eastern garb. She still went a tad too heavy on the makeup in his opinion. Kana never wore makeup. Then again, until recently they couldn't afford to be seen together. All of that was about to change. He just needed to make it to the guild before the shit hit the fan. Tell the old man he was leaving and let the chips fall where they may. And if it got dicey, well, instant transmission was useful for escaping dicey situations. The thought of Minurva's expression was priceless, and it actually evoked a small smile. He took no pleasure in hurting her. Hell, in a different life, he'd probably have married her instead, but he knew that they simply could not be. Whatever feelings of lust she evoked in him, his love for Kana was far stronger. He would not give in. "I'm quite pleased, actually," he answered, giving no insight to his feelings. "Your job went over well, then?" Naruto nodded, but left out the details. He didn't want to piss off Minurva just yet. She was as vindictive as they came. If she found out about his plans to leave Sabretooth, she'd doubtlessly strive to complicate things for him and Yukino. If he left, he was damn well taking his apprentice with him. She wouldn't be left to suffer the depravity of this guild. She'd be happier in fairy tale. The latching of a lock drew his attention. When the blonde turned, he suddenly realized that he was no longer standing outside, just as Minurva was no longer holding his arm. A precursory glance at his surroundings confirmed his worst fears. How the hell did he end up inside her house again? It must have something to do with her magic. Whenever he was with her, he invariably ended up inside her apartment. Not to take it the wrong way, but he was growing rather tired of it. "Over here." His gaze snapped toward the bed. Minera lay there before him, fingers tracing a bare thigh. Golden eyes traced longingly across every inch of him, taking his exasperation in stride. Her every gesture, screaming of invitation and subjugation, would have had most men rutting her the moment they laid eyes on her. Naruto wasn't most men. His heart had been stolen by long ago and not by her. Thusly, he felt only the slightest stirring of arousal when Minurva let slip a single strap, exposing the cream-colored skin of her waist and shoulder. He ruthlessly suppressed it. "Nobody has to know," a nasty little voice in his head whispered. "Nobody will know." "I'll know." He rebuked himself. Besides, Kanas are bigger. Fight perversion with perversion. A perfect tactic. Smirking, he stepped around her, and she, mistaking his smile for something else, smiled in turn. "I was so lonely while you were gone," she cooed. Naruto twitched. This again." She grabbed his hand as he tried to brush past her and brought it to her bare breast, caressing it, eliciting a soft moan from her lips. Naruto shuddered in surprise, his smile shattering like so much glass. He wanted to take her right then and there, and for a moment he teetered on a knife's edge. The slightest move could send him hurtling over into oblivion. There was no going back beyond this point. With every fiber in his being, he willed himself to step away from her and toward the door. "Minurva, that's enough." Her lips quirked into a small smile. She did not release his hand. "You're so cold, but that's what I like about you." She pressed it tighter against her chest. Naruto growled. "Stop." He ripped his hand away from her chest, taking with it his dismay most of her dress. "Why do you insist on doing this? You can have anyone else you want, you know that. Sting. Orga. Anyone. Why the bloody hell does it have to be me?" "True," she affirmed, uncrossing her legs with a silken purr before standing. "I can have any man I want, whenever I want. But I want you." Naruto stepped backward, struggling to avert his eyes. "Why? Are you that stupid?" she scoffed, anger breaking through her facade of perpetual calm. "Are you really that dense?" She took his head in her hands, pressed her forehead against his. "I've loved you ever since I was a little girl," she whispered, giggling at his guffawed look. "Don't look so shocked. You were the first man to ever best my father in combat. It's only natural I have a crush on you after a beating like that, after watching you ruthlessly destroy the strongest man I'd ever known. It was a draw. Not from the way I saw it." She shook her head. "As far as I'm concerned, you should be the one lading Sabretooth, not him. You defeated him back then, and you've only grown stronger since, while he's become even weaker than before." Her eyes shone with wanton need, promising him all he desired. "Think of it, Naruto-kun. We can rule Sabretooth, together, just the two of us." Her lips pushed against his on a sudden, and even his soul threatened to burst. Kana. At the memory of his wife, he became frozen beneath Minurva's fingers, dead beneath her kisses. He willed himself to turn cold and unresponsive, like a corpse. Tenderly, he took her hands and pulled them away from his face. "I'm sorry, but I've already told you, I just don't feel that way." He was lying. His body wanted Minurva. He ached for her. But his heart wanted Kana. It was his iron will that had kept him faithful all these years, and he wasn't about to let it give out now, not when was so close to having everything he wanted. "Please, Naruto," she begged, tugging at him. "We'd be so good together." "Minurva," he shook his head. "I'm flattered, really. But I can't." "There's someone else, isn't there?" she pressed. "That's why you can't bear to be with me, isn't it?" "I have no idea what you're taking about." "Then sleep with me." Her eyes glistened with tears. "Am I so ugly that you can't stand me? You know damn well that's not it. Then are you gay?" "Hell no." "That's too bad," she sighed. "It would have made a good excuse." His fingers closed around the brass knob. "It really is." "Oh, but you don't have a choice anymore." She absently pushed a raven strand behind her ear. "You have to sleep with me. You have to be with me. Forever. Or else." When he looked back at her, those amber-yellow eyes were hardened, filled with fierce, unrelenting resolve. A niggling sensation of doubt nagged at him as he glared forward calmly. "Or else what?" He scoffed at her as his hand turned the latch. "Or they'll all know." Naruto froze. The handle was like ice beneath his fingers. "What did you say?" Minurva smiled cruelly. "Or I'll tell Papa all about your secret little life." Her words dropped to a venomous hiss. "Your wife, your child, everything. I'll bring it all crashing down around your ears. If I can't have you, then I'll see your world burn before I let anyone else have the chance." Dread struck him in the stomach like a frozen fist. So they knew. Or at least she did. Clever bitch. Clever, clever little bitch. But she had another thing coming if she thought a threat like that would bring him to heel. She also had another thing coming beside D's fucking bitch slap to the face. "Fuck you and go to hell." His magic splashed harmlessly against Minurva's shield even as an empty palm pushed through and cracked her across the face, smacking her across the jaw in an unrelenting open-palmed slap. The blow sent her body sprawling and released the locks all at once. Naruto bolted for the door, uncaring for her shouts, nor those abrupt flarings of magical power. "You won't get away with this," she shouted at his back. "The lacrima's already transmitting. Everyone else already knows." Naruto spat on the street, wanting nothing more than to dislodge the taste of her from his mouth. He pressed 2 fingers to his head, wanting nothing more than to distance himself from this place. Why the hell did the damned old man have to have those seals put up in his inner sanctum? They prevented him from transmitting directly to Gemma and ending this once and for all. He couldn't even get a fix on his location, which was odd given the fact that he hardly ever left town anymore. No matter. He'd find the old man and make this right, then he'd bug the hell out. Rogue and Sting were waiting for him as he rounded the corner. Naruto froze. That two-timing bitch. She'd planned this all along. She'd set him up. Refusing to play to their game, to be herded into the guild, he turned in the opposite direction, forcing himself to look straight ahead as the twin dragons moved to flank him. Sting on his left, Rogue on the right. Rounded another bend. Sting was the first to speak, hissing into his ear just as they moved into the crowded commoner district. "You've betrayed us, senpai." Naruto sighed, pushing a hand through his hair, willing himself to act natural. "You're making a mistake, Sting." His eyes drifted to Rogue, and he found nothing but sorrow in the younger man's gaze. "You too, Rogue. You don't want to do this." He stepped backward as the twin dragons stepped forward, hurting him backwards and into a corner. Blue eyes drifted lazily across the populated square, narrowing in annoyance as he realized just how many casualties there would be. Annoyance, warped into disbelief, twisting into horror as he registered the resolve in their eyes. "You take out all these people just to kill me?" His gaze snapped back to Sting. "You're a bigger fool than I thought. The only fool I see here is you." The Dragon Slayer nudged him out of the square and away from prying eyes. Naruto resisted the urge to flee. If he tried to use instant transmission now, he'd need at least 10 seconds of uninterrupted concentration. He didn't trust Sting or Rogue to give him that time. "You're making a mistake." "Am I?" The younger Slayer accused as the darkness of the alley closed in around them. "From where I stand, you're the one making a mistake." "Is it a mistake to fall in love?" The whiskered blonde countered. "It is when you've been consorting with the enemy this entire time." Sting persisted. "Their master, no less. You think we'll just let that stand?" Naruto pushed past them. If he could just reach the mouth of the alley, he'd be able to defend himself. Here, swallowed by darkness, he was vulnerable. But their voices followed him, nipping at his heels, mocking him and all he'd accomplished in the last 7 years. "We looked up to you. We respected you." A muscle jumped in the blonde's jaw. He lunged forward and into the daylight, the twin dragons hot on his heels. Magical power flaring, he fired a haphazard blast into the air. Everyone looked up as one, just in time for the Dragon Slayer to unleash a ghastly gout of fire from behind his lips. It roared high overhead, singing hairs and harming hats, leaving the non-images stunned and untouched. Naruto grinned as looks of shock and cold terror overcame their awe. Silently ruining his every act, the blonde opened his mouth and roared out, "Flee!" Sting and Rogue balked at their senpai's sudden declaration. "Flee, you fools!" He cackled, belching another blast of flame, the roar swinging wide as he turned his head to aim it. "Flee for your lives!" Mwah! Because that was his intent. Even as Sting and Rogue moved to silence their fellow Slayer, someone screamed. And the stampede began in earnest. Civilians shouted and children wept, only to be scooped up by their parents. Everyone fled from the 3 Slayers. All of the non-mages wanted nothing to do with the oncoming conflict. "Bastard!" Sting hissed, realizing they'd lost the advantage. "We didn't want to fight you." "You didn't want to fight me on even footing, you mean?" Naruto snapped back. "Coward!" "You're right, senpai," Rogue admitted, stepping forward. "We didn't want to fight you. We wanted to resolve this peaceably." Naruto snorted. "Tell that to him. And if I refuse? Then we'll go after your friends and family." Sting snarled, unthinking. "We can't have any weaklings in our guild." Rogue's eyes flickered over to Naruto. To the untrained eye, the Dragon Slayer did not react at all to the information of his family's impending peril. He looked as though he hadn't even heard a thing Sting had said. But Rogue knew Naruto fairly well, and he could see the blue-eyed Slayer's jaw clenching through his chiseled, whiskered cheeks. And when he spoke, it was with a venom that silenced the entire street. "What happened to Yukino?" he asked. "Sting." The Shadow Dragon Slayer immediately recognized what Naruto was getting at. Sting stood rigid as he stared in forced silence at the other Slayer. Naruto glared forward calmly, almost causing Rogue to wince. Sting was in serious trouble and the rest of the city wasn't about to spring to his defense. Naruto didn't care what the answer was, only that it gave him an excuse. "That's none of your damned business, traitor." "Meaning that you're holding her captive?" the blonde accused, eyes blazing. "I swear, if you've harmed a single hair on my apprentice's head." "She's safe." "Rogue!" Sting exclaimed aghast, gawping at his shamefaced partner. "We're not supposed to tell him that. She's took another job soon after she returned." Rogue continued, intervening before his partner could attempt further deception, before he could drive the blonde dragon into a frenzy from which he'd never return. "I'd tell you more, but this is all I know." He tossed a flyer at Naruto, and the blonde deftly snatched it out the air. Why give me this? Because I feel Master Gemma is making a mistake. Rogue elaborated, his expression pained. But as part of this guild, I am obligated to abide by its rules. Nevertheless, I will not lie to you. His eyes narrowed with a modicum of respect. You taught me that much yourself. Naruto read the paper over, his eyes welling with emotion. If there was anyone in Sabretooth he cared for other than Yukino, it was Rogue. The boy was like his little brother, in a sense. He couldn't bear to fight him. But if it was for his family. Rogue, Naruto began when a katana plunged deep into his chest, pinning him against the building he'd been resting against. Blood began to spill out of his parted lips as his eyes bulged in anger and disbelief. Who was it? The culprit was already standing in front of him, his hand gripping the hilt of Rogue's katana and forcing it deeper through flesh. Dobengal stared back at him in utter contempt, the ninja-esque mage's expression hidden behind his half-mask. Naruto glared up at him in defiance of his mortal wound, sneering at his former comrade through blood-bleached teeth. Dobengal? Sting seethed. We had the situation under control. Master's orders. The mage answered. Sting frowned. Gemma-sama authorized this? The shinobi mage's silence spoke volumes on the matter. Rogue blanched as he saw the blood on the blade, as he saw his friend, his mentor, bleeding out in the street, slain without want or warning. Something in him twisted at the sight. And despite his mortal wound, Naruto began to speak to his supposed assassin. So, the old man put a kill order out on me already, eh? He scoffed. Shoulda known he wouldn't listen. Shoulda known he'd send you to do his dirty work. His grin grew as he reached up to grasp the blade. You know what? I never did like you, ya Sinuva bitch. I don't know why I even bothered to try. He shook his head, gesturing at the growing puddle of crimson beneath him. But, killing me like this kinda ruins the reputation of our guild, doesn't it? We're not allowed to kill. What are you gonna do? Cremate me? He chuckled. That'd be ironic. The great sun god reduced to ashes at his own funeral. But you see, die, traitor. The ninja gave the blade a final wrench and the blonde collapsed. Into smoke. Just like that, Uzumaki Naruto was gone, leaving nothing behind but a burning log in his place. The ninja gasped, recognizing the illusion spell for what it was. Though he still held Rogue's katana in hand, the element of surprise had been lost to him. Where had he gone? Where was his target? He turned, seeking his assignment as he'd been told. A sharp strike to the back of the head ended all his thoughts. Dobengal crumpled to the ground like a sack of potatoes, his body limp and nervely from the blow. Naruto stood behind him, untouched and whole, and very, very perturbed. For a moment, Rogue felt relief. Then he'd realized the implications of what Dobengal had just done, what Gemma had ordered him to do. Guilds were not allowed to murder their own members. Excommunicate, yes, but murder? Absolutely not. There could be only one course of action now. And if they weren't going to cover it up, now I've got no choice. Naruto sighed. I was content to just walk away from all this. I was going to leave you to your own squabbles, your own petty little feuds. He withdrew a lacrima from the folds of his jacket, a small, potable device designed for communication. But now the old man's gone off his rocker. I can't let this stand any longer. Clearing his throat, he began to speak into the device. This is Naruto, sun god Uzumaki of the 10 Wizard Saints. I would like to report an attempted murder on behalf of Sabretooth. My own. Would you kindly send Lahar and the others over as soon as possible? The lacrima shattered in his hand. Naruto blinked back at Sting, slightly perturbed by the boy's actions. He dusted his hand off, rubbed the numbness from his arm. That won't do you any good, he sighed. They'll be here within the hour. Are you insane? Sting exclaimed. You helped build this guild. Why would you want to tear it down? I don't intend to tear it down. Naruto frowned. I intend to get rid of all the asshats and become the new master, if the council allows it. Barring that, I'll just join Fairy Tail. Cammy knows they've treated me better than you lot have. He moved to brush past them. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a date with the old man. Sting struck out as his face. Naruto staggered backward, rubbing at his jaw. You can't be serious. A scowl wormed its way through his expression. After all this, you still want to fight? Do you really hate me that much? You, Sting seethed, this is all your fault. We're going to be ruined because of you. You had it coming. Naruto growled. This is no longer the guild I founded. Excommunicating those who are weak, exiling those who fail, this guild was never the same the day the 5 of you joined. Now, stand aside or so help me, I'm going through you. I can't let you. Sting screamed. I won't. Rogue, make him listen. Come on. Rogue wrested his hand away. Damn it, he just couldn't bring himself to turn against Sting after all. Not after all they'd been through. Naruto looked at him for a long moment, hurt flickering across his features. Then his gaze hardened, his resolve roaring high, higher than the flames burning off his body. All right, youngsters, Naruto growled, allow me to refresh your memories. Let me remind you why the first generation came first, and yours came third. The air itself seemed to darken around him, as he drew breath, the light itself growing dim, turning to dusk as they looked on. Let me show you why my power is almighty and everlasting. Omnipotent, when compared to yours, the like of light and shadow. He drew in a great and mighty sigh, eyes flaring an obscene, unholy red. Let me show you why the sun is eternal. His coat and cape shredded themselves away, flayed to pieces by the sheer output of magical energy. He was drawing energy from the sun, soaking up the warmth afforded him by his native element. Sting swore back at himself. They tried to herd him back to the guild for this very reason. Out here in the open with the sun shining down upon him, and not so much as a single cloud to obscure it, Naruto was nearly invincible. Even if they managed to defeat him, he had but to breath and he would be restored. Sting. I know. The White Dragon Slayer braced himself for the hell was to come. Their base forms weren't on par to such an onslaught. Damn it, this was going to hurt. He dredged up the magic within him, forced it, to bend to his will as he had when he'd killed his first dragon. Just a little more there. White Drive, his body burst into light. Shadow Drive. Rogue announced, shadows flaring about his body as well. Is that it? Naruto scoffed at the sudden surge in their magic. You think you can copy my technique, just like that? Ha! Sting and Rogue exchanged a glance. It was the former who dared venture the question. What? Naruto's grin grew. Who do you think it was that invented your precious little drive technique? An overpowering sensation of pressure bore down upon them like an invisible hand. They sensed something enormous nearby, silent in the dark, like a giant passing within arm's reach. A great, gravid deadly presence too huge to grant them notice. Sting glanced to Naruto and saw him grin as his magical power spiked, as Rogue's fingertips pressed against his temples. A droplet of blood fell from his brother's nose to join that of Sting's own. He was suddenly grateful for Lecter's absence. This magical pressure, it could only mean one thing. Rogue. Too late, he realized the horror of what they faced. My turn. The blonde snarled. Sun Drive. Whatever restraint Naruto had exercised vanished with these words. Any form of limit he'd imposed upon himself was subsequently eradicated in the resulting surge, forcing the Dragon Brothers back, as a tidal wave of Stygian darkness enveloped their senpai. When he emerged from the blackness, he was a dragon incarnate. Shimmering scales lined the length of either arm, flames licking at the edges of hardened skin. Clawed hands clenched in anticipation, he beckoned them forward, and the air itself seemed to warp with his words. Come, young ones. Naruto roared. It is a deep, throaty, ear-shattering crack. I'll show you the difference between us. He shouldn't have been able to do that. Rogue muttered sullenly, petulant as they gazed upon the heat-glazed form. We should be the only ones able to activate Dragon Force at will. Tell that to him. Sting spat back. So much for taking down the infamous Naruto, sun god Uzumaki without a fight. As much as he was loath to admit it, any chance of any easy victory went out the window the very instant they'd threatened his wife and child, the moment they'd forced their senpai to choose between love and pride. Clearly the former had won out. It was there lurking in his eyes. Anger. Any mercy Naruto might have shown them was now a thing of the past. He'd be coming at them full force, from the very beginning. "It's not too late, senpai," Rogue pleaded. "Kneel before Master Gemma and beg forgiveness. We can still make this right." The first-generation Slayer hissed out a reply. Forgiveness? All the air grew thick and muggy around them as the temperature spiked. Even the atmosphere itself would rather evaporate than face the Dragon Slayer's wrath. "It was too late for forgiveness the moment Sabretooth threatened my family. Prepare yourselves." Seeing no point in further banter, they lunged, hurtling powerful blows at the Dragon Slayer's head. They'd smashed countless opponents this way before with such flawless teamwork, and they saw no reason why such tactics would fail them now that he had the advantage in numbers. Naruto fought back smartly, less recklessly than one would have expected. He ducked and weaved, evading the worst of Sting's bolt and blows, brushing aside Rogue's deadly strikes, all the while maintaining a careful distance between the two of them. At first. Then he closed the distance. It was slow, a riposte here, a parry there, but it was inexorable. Each move was flawlessly choreographed, each step brought him one step closer to the twin dragons, each footfall forcing the young slayers to change their tactics until even that became a feat in and of itself. But they were holding their own, somehow. Impossibly, they were able to avoid the worst of his attacks, just enough so he couldn't immediately end them. And then he disappeared. Sting surged forth, half expecting the Sun Dragon to reappear at his flank and blocked, guarding against an invisible strike from empty air. The attack came from behind. His hip exploded with blood as Naruto's claw sliced through his back. Sting gasped and stumbled forward, his eyes looking forward in disbelief as he struggled to keep himself upright. Naruto snarled as he moved to end the battle, only for a well-placed shadow strike from Rogue to force him away. He blurred backwards, arms crossed, eyes narrow with contempt. Rogue pursued in earnest, buying his comrade precious seconds to find his footing. To recover. Sting forced himself back to his feet, placed his fingers against his hip, wiping the blood away. Damn, but he was good. One moment he stood across from him, arms folded and eyes narrowed, blazing with hate. The next, red orbs the color of blood filled the entirety of his vision. Fingers clenched into a claw, passed through empty air as the Sting flung himself backward and to safety. He touched a hand to his cheek, alarmed to find a series of bloody streaks there not unlike the blonde's own whiskers. Naruto made no effort to pursue. Instead he turned his wrath upon the unprotected Sting. Terino. Sinister scales burst into flame, coating the limb in a sea of heat and fire. The sun's wrath rolled up his sleeve, revealing the claws and the sinister scales lining the length of his arm, blackening the limb in eerie hues of stark white and crimson. Sting balked at the sight of them, the flames erupting from the blonde's elbow, acting as a booster for the coming blow. Even he, young as he was, knew what would happen if he connected the dots in such a manner. If that blow collided with his face. Without hesitation he launched himself toward his enemy. Tattered cloak spreading out behind him, he swooped at Sting, drawing his fist back to deliver a knockout blow. His clenched knuckles flew at the White Dragon Slayer, who caught it easily with his bare hand, squeezing until the bones ground together. Not bad, senpai. Naruto's eyes bulged as white scales scrawled across the young dragon's face, marring the flush of his tan body. You had us on the ropes for a while there. Grunting, Naruto attempted a gut punch to the ribs with his other fist, but the third-generation Slayer effortlessly blocked the blow as well. Sting's grin grew as a shadow erupted behind him and vaulted over his shoulders. But not anymore. The Dragon Slayer of the Sun had already flung himself backward, even before Rogue's fist cracked across his jaw. Even then, even with the might of Dragon Force burgeoning his already considerable magic prowess, the sheer force of the assault was almost enough to drive him under. The blonde's head snapped back with the blow, his body reeling, struggling, to comprehend what had just happened. He landed in a crouch, eyes aflame with fury and disbelief, opened his mouth to speak. Hakuryu no Yakugeki. Iryu no Zangeki. A flash of motion to Naruto's right drew his attention. He saw rather than felt what came next as the pair approached and lashed out in a perfectly executed, flawlessly timed, combination attack. Rogue's gloved claw snaked in just beneath his chest, stings just above his jaw. Even over the tumult of his own hammering heart, he heard the crack that had to be a rib or his nose breaking. Probably both. Blood leaked forth from his lips, pooled in his lungs, threatening to choke him. The pair stayed balanced on either planted foot, cocked their respective limbs again, lashed out once more, this time connecting with his stomach as he turned to look at them. The Sun Dragon Slayer staggered under their combined assault, his body bruising beneath a series of bone-jarring blows. But it did not break. He drew another breath, pushing all of his power outward even as they surged forward to end him. Terino. Hoko! White-hot flame, azure fire, erupted from his lips, forcing his attackers backward, just for a mere moment. It was enough. He drew back, half a pace, nothing more. Scarlet eyes gleamed brightly in the afternoon, narrowing, till they were little more than twin pinpricks of crimson. Abruptly, the blonde drew himself and inhaled. They suddenly changed again, those eyes, the sickening shade of scarlet melding with the soft blue of the opposite Ursa's, fusing into an eerie, ephemeral violet. He stood woodenly, not taking enough care. Wiping a thin trickle of blood from his mouth, the reinvigorated blonde pinioned his opponents with a baleful glare. I really didn't want to do this, he muttered, softly, reluctant. It puts too much of a strain on my body. He winced, wobbling on his bad leg. But you're not leaving me much choice, are you? A bead of sweat sluiced down his cheek, joining the blood trickling from his wounds. Watch closely now. The blonde crossed his arms before him in its formation, planted his feet. And don't blame me if you die. What's he talking about? Sting hissed. Dragon Force was the ultimate level of power. A dragon slayer couldn't take it any higher that. Unless shock and horror flitted across his visage. By the looks on their faces, Naruto knew. I'm afraid this is where the ass-kicking starts, my friends. With that, Naruto threw his head back and screamed. He drank deep of the sun's light, allowing its energy to swell through his soul, to burgeon his reserves to inhumane heights. But Naruto had never been human to begin with now, had he? There was a tale about Sabertootha's so-called sun god passed down through the years by Master Gemma himself. There was good reason for that name of his. Naruto's power was tied to the sun itself. The higher it hovered in the sky, the greater his power grew. But this was something else, something not tied to his Dragon Slayer abilities. This was something more. Tattered and matted, his formerly spiky hair grew long and jagged, spreading out behind him even as lightning surrounded his body. The earth quivered in fear, the air shook from the simple sight of the energy rising off his back and shoulders. It rose like a shroud around his body and engulfed him, coating the screaming slayer in an eerie, golden aura. Eyebrows vanished banished by the sinister series of scales scrawling across his skin. Erupting out of his back and body, they clamored forth from his form like an infestation, churning and burning across his burnished body, leaving singed skin beneath. Not enough. Naruto grunted, his body bursting into brilliance. Higher, higher. Azure bled from his body, the flames roaring high with intensity. They couldn't even approach him, such was the blaze, couldn't hope to intervene and halt his transformation. And then it was done. With a final, guttural scream of red-hot agony, sweat pouring down his brow, and out of every pore, the blonde's body burst shining with light as he transcended his mortal coil. It was like watching the rebirth of a phoenix. When the smoke finally deigned to clear, Uzumaki Naruto was gone. Something else stood in his place. His body shone with otherworldly radiance, bright as the sun, rippling with heat and energy. Hair the color of pure gold glittered down his back, leaving whiskered cheeks and an eyebrowless face exposed. His attire was, miraculously, intact despite the blue and black flames roaring over his shoulders and chest. He shifted, an almost imperceptible movement, and the earth eroded at his feet, cratering inward, in its haste to escape those blazing violet eyes, the unholy wrath held within them. Lightning crackled around his form, the air spitting and sizzling from the friction his mere presence induced. Though humanoid in appearance, this creature could no longer be called human, nor could the magical pressure rolling off his form. Rogue shivered. Sting, he whispered. Yeah. We were fools. The white dragon managed a numb nod. This truly was the sun god, Sting realized, standing here before them. This was the only man in Sabertooth who'd ever fought Master Gemma to a draw. And he was about to tear them apart for the crime of threatening his family, in recompense for their temerity. Gemma honestly expected them to fight something like this? They couldn't even get close to him. Regret as thick as the muggy atmosphere subsuming them seized his heart as he caught sight of their senpai's true from. Damn it, they'd had him. They had him. He'd been at death's door. And now he'd ascended even higher than before. This great god that had once been a mere mortal turned, bringing wrathful violet eyes to bear upon the young dragon slayers, pinioning them with a gaze. You should be proud of yourselves, he remarked, glowing eyes hot as hell, voice black as pitch. Only Master Gemma has pushed me this far in battle before. What? It's over, Sting. Sting didn't even have time to blink. All he felt was the breaking of bones and the cracking of ribs, his body screaming in agony as he sank down to his knees. Naruto stood over him, sparks arcing off his body, lending his form a sinister aura. Sting felt his jaw drop open, mouthing hanging in a small, round O. The sun dragon calmly withdrew his clenched knuckles and, before the white dragon could ever hope counter, dropped him with a brutal right hook to the face. Cartilage broke beneath his fist, shattering Sting's nose, but by then thankful-eyed third-generation dragon was already unconscious. Sorry, Lecter. His body slumped to the street, toppled by the sun god. Naruto stepped over his broken body and checked for a pulse. Finding one, he nodded, straightened, the flames of his ultimate technique slowly smoldering away from his body, leaving him alone in the streets. Alone with Rogue. Naruto glared bloody red daggers at the shadow dragon slayer. He no longer needed the form of the sun god to fight, and maintaining it for more than a few minutes placed a tremendous strain upon his body. To hold onto such power beyond the realm of mortals, was difficult. To be consumed by it was easy. His life. Every second counted. He stepped forward, the temperature spiking once more. He would end this quickly, but he had to be certain that he faced an opponent and not a friend. Are you going to stand in my way as well, Rogue? He challenged. The dragon slayer stared him down a moment longer, shook his head. He backed down. No. He relented. I know when I'm beaten, senpai. Naruto nodded. Thanks. I really didn't want to use this form on you. What are you going to do? Rogue asked as he stalked past him, toward the guild building. When you find Master Gemma? The blonde didn't bother to look back as he ascended the steps. Isn't it obvious? Naruto growled and cracked his knuckles. I'm going to kick his fucking ass. So you've come at last, traitor. Gemma. Dirge of the dragon. Cold fury burned the world white and the world trembled. Quivered in fear as the universe smoldered around it. Wept like a babe as everything imploded. Shadows erupted from the earth and soared across the sky. Flames roared high. Light and dark, hand in hand, laid waste to anyone and anything that dared oppose them. All this magical power emanated from but a single man, a single pillar of light, roaring high into the heavens as it pierced the earth spared this wrath. Shops sank into the earth. Streets found themselves sundered, great ravines stretching across the land for as far as the eye could see. Men fled. Women clutched children to their breast and prayed to their gods for salvation, for help that would never come. Because Naruto, sun god Uzumaki, was on the loose. He strode through the halls of Sabertooth in brutal fashion, laying waste to those fool. Enough to oppose him, which were thankfully few. Most had the sense to clear the halls, to avert their eyes from this great god of a man, whose very steps set the floor afire with his wrath. He was done holding back. The full might of his magic pressed down on the walls and the floor, the heat of the sun itself melting glass and setting banners alike ablaze. And still they came at him, mages he'd once called allies, friends even. Each determined to protect Gemma. Each destined to suffer defeat at the sun god's hand. There was no hesitation to be found within his strikes now, only cold, brutal precision as he laid waste to his enemies. In their brief moments before unconsciousness, it was a brief, brutal reminder of what they faced. one of the 10 wizard saints. Bones snapped and muscles tore as he shredded his way through his former home. Screams tore through the halls in his ears. As he ascended to the uppermost levels of the guild, he found the hindrances to be less and less prevalent. He simply didn't care. If they fled, he left them alone. If they fought well, they didn't last very long. He just reached the uppermost hall when he heard the distinct fluttering of wings. "You're seriously going to go in there?" a voice asked from above. Naruto harumphed harshly, but neither did he slacken his pace. "Now you choose to show up?" he asked the rafters. "Tsunade?" He scarcely even registered the weight before it settled upon his shoulder. Risking a glance up at them, he found himself face to face with an exceed. But not just any exceed. Blonde in coloration, though not nearly such as the aura blazing around him, she was strange, even for a member of her race. Clutching a bottle of sake in one hand and a saucer in another, she seemed immune to the flame exuded, as she should after all the many years they'd spent together. Large white wings dominated most of her back and a small, violet jewel dominated the center of her forehead. Hazel eyes contemplated him coolly, even as she poured sake into the saucer and offered him a drink from the bottle. He accepted it gladly, grimacing as the burning liquid coursed down his throat. "You're being foolish," she warned him. "I'll be fine," he soothed the exceed. "I'm a wizard saint, remember? All the more reason to be cautious," she insisted. "Gemma's probably prepared for you." Naruto grunted. The discussion was over. At last he found he could go no further. He stood before a large door. Beyond it lay Gemma's inner sanctum. Before it stood 2 mages, Orga Nanagir and Rufus Lore. He'd half expected to find Minurva standing there as well, barring his path. But no, it was only they. Orga of the Black Lightning. A wide grin stretched across his chiseled face, splitting his cheeks. Rufus's smile was less jovial but by no means less threatening. Uzumaki glanced at the sight of them, but not out of fear or weakness. He simply didn't want to afford the man an opportunity to copy his magic. Sensing his distress, the flames flared about his body, the temperature spiking in response. He edged forward as did they, waiting for an opportunity to present itself. Orga cracked his neck from side to side, the motion eliciting a sharp frown from his companion. Naruto stifled a snort. These mages were an uneven pair. Their teamwork was sorely lacking. Not a thing like Sting and Rogue's tandem attacks. He'd held back against them for that very reason. They'd make fine mages someday. But these two? They'd be ash before they could blink. "Master's waiting for you." Had he still held his eyebrows, the blonde would have arched them. As it was, he only scowled. "Is he now?" Orga nodded. Naruto brushed past the muscular mage. His quarrel was not with them. Not yet. "Lady Yukino awaits you as well." Naruto stopped in his tracks, his face slowly appearing over his shoulder as he curiously regarded his former comrade opponent. A look of irritation crossed his single visible eye as it regarded the smirking sorcerer only a few yards behind him. So she was here after all. He should have known Gemma would have countermeasures in place to subdue him. Lightning crackled across the expanse between them, sparks flaying across the skin of the Dragon Slayer as his mind worked at a furious pace. He could tarry no longer. "Tsunade," he began slowly, coldly. "Get off." "But, get off." The exceed complied, spreading her wings and taking flight even as the blonde turned to present the memory mage with the full weight of his wrath. If the mage noticed the sudden humidity in the air, then he made little mention of it. Rufus adjusted his hat with a flourish of his wrist, either unaware of, or simply uncaring for the smoldering figure of fury looming over him. "You have 3 seconds to tell me what he's done to her," Naruto hissed. "Traitors must be punished," he began, raising his wand. Naruto slapped the spell aside as though it were a mere bauble. Rufus felt a touch of fear, but repeated the effort, calling upon yet another spell courtesy of his memory-make magic. A chilling breeze froze the corridor and found itself subsequently shattered as the sun god stormed through. The touch of fear turned to terror. If the cold could not quell these flames, then... His gaze swept upward as he summoned a deluge of water, a veritable typhoon, and dropped it on the blonde's head, drowning him. For a moment, Rufus dared to hope. He'd done it. Achieved the impossible. Quenched an unquenchable flame in the form of man. One. Naruto announced as he stepped out of the fog, steam roiling from his shoulders. Monster. She's been stripped of her mark. Incredulity trickled into his words as he raised his wand anew and dropped the roof itself on them. The huge chunk of rubble never reached its target. Like everything else, it simply died the moment it reached the blonde, smoldered away into embers before it could so much as graze his shoulders. This was absurd. He'd never shown such levels of power before. How were they supposed to stop him if all their attacks turned to ash the moment they touched him? If gravity could not crush him, then darkness would smother him. Naruto stood there, covered in dust, but otherwise intact. "2," he hissed archly. "Die, sun god." The entire corridor darkened around Rufus as he drew upon the most forbidden energies known to him in his memory make. His most lethal of all spells, and by far the most deadly guaranteed to stifle life itself. Tendrils of all-encompassing darkness coiled around him, hissing like serpents. One touch from these would strike the fear of death into anything, be it man or mouse. The sun god would die a death of fear and loneliness, and it would be Rufus who dealt the death blow. "Yamato no Orochi," he announced, hurling his most potent spell straight at the blonde. Naruto increased his stride all of half a pace, aura flaring as thousands of screaming soul and snakes swallowed him whole. Lightning rose, thick, fat sparks crackling around him as he slogged through the deepest darkness itself. He staggered, dropped to a knee. Groaned. Rufus cackled, his victory assured. "There." He laughed, his facade slipping in the wake of the sun god's imminent defeat. "You should know, Master is righteously punishing her as we sp. 3. Rufus's eyes went wide as his right arm tumbled away from him in a flash, leaving the wand to tumble out of his fingers. "Vermin," he hissed, swinging his arm forward. "You think you know fear? Let me show you what true fear is." Rufus couldn't even scream as he found his body sheathed in the golden flames, because his vocal cords were already gone. The back of Naruto's hand collided with his face, smoldering away part of his jaw. Frantic and fading, he could only utter a choking gurgle as he watched the blonde shove his other hand forward, the limb wreathed in golden fire. "Congratulations," he said, his voice black as pitch. "You've successfully managed to piss me off. Any last words before you die?" Rufus shook his head frantically, trying to say something, anything at all. All that emerged was a choking hiss as the blonde's glowing fingers closed around his throat. Naruto's grin grew. "I didn't think so." Orga Nanagir could only look on in disbelief, frozen in horror, as the sun god summarily obliterated his partner. This was madness. How were they supposed to fight the strongest member of their guild when he wasn't holding back? Yukino was only in the next room over and, instead of powering down as they'd expected him to, the blonde had flown into a berserker rage. "Damn it, Rufus," he hissed as the Dragonslayer's eyes cut across him, pinioning him with a gaze. "I would have liked to sing a song about our victory today. Guess that's not gonna happen. You're next." Naruto snarled, striding forward, aura spiking to unimaginable levels. "Make peace with your god, Orga." Orga of the Black Lightning knew that this would be his ultimate battle. He alone was all that stood between Gemma and the wrath of the sun god. Even their master, mightier as he was, stood little chance against this all-consuming magic. The final bulwark. The last defense. And he'd be damned if he went down without a fight. Placing his hands together, he summoned his ultimate spell, drawing upon the power of the heavens, even as the Dragon Slayer drew breath. Black sparks spat and hissed archly around his frame, building to a deafening cacophony of screeching sound as his muscles bulged. 120 millimeters black lightning. "Terino." Kana glanced up from where she sat. "Naruto." She'd withdrawn into her personal quarters, distancing herself from the party outside. It didn't feel right, celebrating the return of her friends and family when the most important part of that family was miles away and potentially in peril. She'd left Cornelia in Alzak and Biska's care to play with Asuka, the children content to play with one another and share stories of whose daddy was the strongest. Granted, Kana already knew who was the strongest, not to mention the best in bed, but she decided to let the children have their fun. Besides, her attention was focused elsewhere. Just now she felt his magical power spike. But how was that possible? He was leagues away from here, gone to confront his guild and tell them he was done with them. Finished. For a moment she felt dread. Naruto was not the sort to take on an entire guild by himself, was he? Kana knew her husband. Just as she knew he was wont to fly into an unstoppable rage whenever she, Cornelia, or anyone dear to him for that matter was threatened, or, Kami forbid, placed in danger. He was always holding himself back, always afraid of hurting others, but on the off chance when a loved one was in trouble. A small smile danced across her lips at the thought. Kick their asses, honey. Cannon. Hoko. The twin spells collided, pitting the power of the sun against heaven's black lightning. When the former powered through his spell and overwhelmed him, Orga could only balk. Lifted from his feet by the sheer size of the explosion, his back kissed the wall, window and mortar shattering alike behind him. Naruto snapped into existence above him, another roar already prepared. Orga raised his arms in a feeble block, but it was already too late. The spell was far too close to balk, let alone absorb. Hoko. Hellfire rained down on his head, scouring him clean. Fire and flame pushed down on his hands, slamming them to the floor. Absent of their owner. For a moment Orga could only stare at the stumps of his arms in awe and terror. There was no blood. Naruto had burned right through them, severing them neatly at the wrists. The blackened stumps twitched, as though they themselves could not believe the travesty wrought Yun them in recompense for their own temerity. Then came the pain and all thoughts of contemplation disappeared. Aesiwarg. He slumped to the floor, tucking his ruined arms into his chest. His days as a mage were over, destroyed alongside his hands. My hands, he screamed. What have you done? You brought this upon yourself? Naruto scowled. The moment you thought it was all right to threaten my family, you brought this down on your heads? The flames dimmed somewhat, revealing his customary countenance beneath the golden hair and the all-encompassing flames. Just stay down, he warned. You might be able to make it to a medic if you don't strain yourself. He stepped around him, leaving him to his misery, hoping he would listen to these words of wisdom in what might be his final hours. Orga was left on his knees, gasping for breath, gawping as the sun god strode away. There was still so much he hadn't done yet. He hadn't sung the ultimate song. Hell, he was still a virgin. He had conquered so much in his time as a mage. He'd stormed the gates of Sabretooth, fought against the twin dragons, Sting and Rogue, and become a masterful mage in his own right. But he was still going to die a virgin. It was a silly thought for him to think he had any chance with the master's daughter, because she only had eyes for Naruto. She wanted him to bear her children. Not Orga. But instead of accepting her feelings like a man should, he'd gone and spurned her love, her affections, her everything. Somehow, that thought rankled Orga Nanagir the worst. His head scraped the concrete floor in defiance of his defeat. You think you can leave? He hissed at the blonde's back. Just like that? Orga. Naruto frowned, his hand locked around the handle to the next room. If you stand up again, I'll have to kill you. I hope you understand that. But Orga wasn't listening. This man held Minurvakan's eye, and he spurned her. He was preferred some alcoholic hussy to perfection. And atop that, he dared to strike her. The woman of Orga's affections. At that, Orga saw red. Great, unholy red. You will be killed by me. He stood wooden, not taking enough care. Lightning gathered in the back of his mouth as he channeled the last of his magical power. Naruto staggered in surprise as the blast struck him the back, shearing through the cape he wore, through muscle and flesh and bone only to disappear as his aura flared once more. Naruto swung around, his blonde hair lengthening, sapphire eyes snapping into violent violet. He was the sun god once more, and Orga was faced with the full extent of his wrath. You fool! Orga wasn't listening, already gathering strength for the next blast. Even as the last of the lightning left his lips, Naruto swapped at him. Bloodied knuckles descended once, twice, thrice, in a fit of fierce fury driving down into the muscled man's face like powerful pistons over and over and over again. Orga soon found himself sharing a similar fate with Rufus, his body reduced to cinders beneath the wrath of the Dragonslayer's fierce blaze, his mind slipping away from him even as he watched flames roil over his body, alongside the flame-sheathed hand descending toward his face for the final time. His final thought was thus: Minurva, I am sorry. I'm so sorry I wasn't good enough for you. So, Naruto's fist crashed down, ending his thoughts. They were all fools. Why did they fight him when they knew it was hopeless? That it was pointless? He took no pleasure in ending their lives, but in the end he could not allow himself to spare them. His rage was too great. The thought that any of them might escape and seek vengeance on him by attacking Kana and Cornelia was too much to bear. Crossing himself, for what must have felt like the upteenth time, the flaming blonde stormed past the smoldering corpses and hurtled forward toward the next room. Please let her be all right. Please let her be all right. Oh Kami, please let her be all right. Momentum at his back, fear and doubt thundering like a freight train straight at him, Naruto burst through the door. It cratered before his fist, the great hinges sloughing off the oak wood in a pile of molten sludge. His gaze swept the room, searching for any sign of anyone or anything, any item that might be out of place. His attention alighted upon a small alcove toward the back of a room, the indentation carved out by years ago by master stone masons. He caught a flash of silver hair amongst the stones. Yukino was there. Bound and naked, gagged, stripped of all her clothes, made to prostrate herself before the guild master's chair as though it were some sort of obscene altar. Where here guild stamp had once been, there was now only a raw, ragged patch of flesh, the skin weeping blood alongside her fresh tears. She shook her head emphatically as he knelt before her, silver tresses swishing back and forth as she struggled to communicate with him, to tell him something. To warn him off the danger. Naruto-sama, she began the moment he removed the gag. Look out. What? Suddenly, a cold, unsettling numbness crept across his back, creeping, crawling amidst the flames that flared throughout his body. Naruto immediately recognized the seal for what it was and grunted in surprise, eyes in a state of constant flux as the fires within him struggled against whatever it was that was trying to suppress them. The flames flared a second later, his body burning impossibly bright as the magnificence of the sun god blazed around him. Unable to withstand such intense energies, to suppress the power of a wizard saint, the numbness receded from his body. The blades that had fallen upon him turned to slag, their holy properties to a mere mist as he shrugged them of Phi's coat. Was that it? He almost scoffed at the absurdity of it. Let's get you out of here, Yukino. He wrapped her in his cloak, which she gratefully accepted, her cheeks burning like a blushing bride. Naruto-sama, I'm so sorry. Not another word. He shushed her. Not until I've gotten you out of here. He knelt once more and took Yukino into his arms, cradling her head against his chest like a newborn babe, her body like a newlywed bride. Flames spat and hissed at the air around them, melting anything that dared stray too close to their master. She sobbed thoughtlessly as he sought the way from which they'd come. He patted her head, gently musing her hair. Gemma would be dealt with later. For now, Yukino was the only thing that mattered. He just had to get her out of here before. Naruto turned back towards the door, only to find it gone. Ah, fuck, he swore a half-instant before the room shimmered. Why am I not surprised? Revealed were a host of mages, and at their head, seated in his throne, was the very bastard he'd come here to thrash. Gemma, the master of Sabertooth. Rising from his seat, removing his arms from their sleeves. So you've come at last, traitor, he spoke grimly. You've murdered my mages, ruined my building, and now, you've interrupted the excommunication of a traitor to the have you to say for yourself? Naruto couldn't quite contain his outrage at that. You want to know what I have to say for myself? Gemma nodded harshly. Naruto held up 2 fingers. He turned his attention to the gaggle of mages surrounding them. Fuck all of you. I wish I'd joined Fairy Tail years ago, but no, I thought I could tolerate you asshats. I thought I could change the guild from within. The guild that I helped form. But now I see that's not going to happen. He cut his gaze toward Gemma. Not so long as you hold that seat, old man. So you've come to kill me then? Says the man who tried to kill me. You were warned. The old man scoffed. Countless times. I cannot allow fairy tale to coexist with us. We must be superior. To make the... Naruto interrupted him with a sharp whistle. Tsunade, he hollered. Here, Naruto. Catch. Yukino squeaked in surprise as Naruto tossed her upward, her eyes flying wide open as she hung there, suspended in midair by some unseen spell. Second later she caught sight of the exceed, seconds later the window burst and there was only empty air. She flailed in surprise for a moment, her arms and legs seeking purchase where there was none to be found. The only thing preventing her collapse was the small cat clutching at her back, the only thing keeping them aloft her wings. Naruto-sama! Yukino cried out. Wait, come back. What are you doing? Get her out of here, Tsunade. The blonde bellowed up at his cat. You know where to take her. Naruto-sama. Naruto steeled his heart and hollered. Tsunade, go. The exceed did not hesitate. Even as Yukino wept, she soared into the opening the mage had made for them. Within a heartbeat her wings carried them beyond the range of the sorcerer's spells, leaving them to focus their full wrath upon the lone traitor standing within their guild. Countless eyes blazed upon him, power-hungry mages, each hungering for the same thing, the opportunity to take down his sun god and claim his title for themselves. Naruto, for the most part, ignored them. His attention was elsewhere. Naruto watched Yukino's escape with a grin. At last, satisfied that his apprentice was indeed safe, he returned himself to the task at hand. Great, he smirked. Now that they're gone, I really have no need to hold back any longer. So you were holding back? Gemma accused. I knew something was wrong when you had such trouble against Sting and Rogue. That's because I didn't want to kill them. Naruto hissed. But you, I'm going to kill. Slowly. Try it if you dare. Oh, I dare. Naruto grunted, the brilliance of the sun flaring about his body once more, burgeoning his battered frame. Golden hair streamed behind him, his eyes flashing an eerie jade violet as the transformation exacted its toll and tore into the depths of his soul. He growled, teeth gnashed together, chipping a moral as his body screamed out in protest. Just a little longer, he soothed his screaming muscles. He spat out the piece of tooth and stepped forward, setting fire to the carpet with his very presence. He felt, rather than saw the flames, saw them trickle along the walls, stretching their steaming tendrils toward the ceiling. Now, he hissed, eyes flying wide open, great fat sparks snarling around his frame. Get your ass down here. Faced with the wrath of fire itself, the mages fled, realizing the impossibility of the task set before them. Those who stayed suffered the wrath of the sun itself. If Gemma cared for the destruction of his guild or the loss of his mages, he did precious little to show it. It's over, Gemma. Naruto growled. Our quarrel ends here. I am disappointed in you, my old friend. Naruto couldn't help but rise to the jab. Disappointed? I had expected you to succeed me. Gemma continued, his expression grim. To marry my daughter and usher in a new era of greatness for Sabretooth. Here his fist clenched with fury. You ungrateful little shit. Here I offered you my kin, my own willing daughter, and you spat in my face. You'd rather drive your seed into that ungrateful whore than know a woman of true greatness. Naruto twitched. And how would you know true greatness? Gemma's silence spoke volumes. You sick fuck. Naruto exclaimed aghast, shuddering all over. Why, you slept with your own daughter? The guild must be preserved. I'm going to kick your ass. As I said, you're welcome to try. You won't be able to singe so much as a hair on my. He never saw the blonde move. Chest? One moment Naruto stood across from him. The next, violent violet-green orbs swelled before his vision, Alongus the Dragonslayer's clenched fist. This is for Yukino. He roared, driving his clenched knuckles deep into the madman's stomach. This is for Rogue. A devastating knee to the groin seconded his outraged cry. Cornelia! An upturned elbow thrust came crashing across the master's chin. Kushina! Stars, whole planets, exploded before Gemma's eyes as the unyielding plate metal of the blonde's forehead protector greeted his skull. Battered, bruised and reeling like a drunkard, he could only sway haphazardly on his feet as the Dragon Slayer drew his arm back for one last attack. And this is for Kana. For the 7 years of hell that you forced the two of us to endure, you son of a bitch. Seizing the master by the cloth of his robe, Naruto flung him toward the ceiling. Metsu Ryu Oji. Naruto announced, violet eyes blazing violently, aura flaring fiercely. Goryuka no Gekitetsu. With that single punch, shaped in the form of screaming dragon, the guild known as Sabertooth exploded. The upper half of the building simply ceased to be, vanishing in the ensuing explosion as the sun god's greatest technique struck the master of Sabertooth Fullin, shearing through clothes and flesh alike. When the smoke cleared, only one was left standing. Master Gemma clutched at the ruined remnants of his right arm, the limb horribly mangled just below the elbow. Severe burns lined the length of his face and chest, having seared through his beard and robe. His eyes burned heatedly upon the wizard saint. "Impudent brat," he hissed. You cannot defeat me. You cannot have Sabertooth. I will not allow it." Naruto scoffed. Well, what do we have here?" he cackled. "I do believe you said I couldn't singe so much as a single hair on your chest? I certainly did more than that." He cast a scornful glance for the ruined remains of Sabertooth and its building, sunlight pouring in through the open ceiling, dust trickling in from cracks in the masonry, the floor ruined and shattered and alighting upon the bulwarks of the once impenetrable fortress. "I think the new look suits me, wouldn't you agree?" Naruto's grin grew. A dragon needs no roof over his head. He needs only the sky. Quite fitting for the Sunto master. Gemma spat a bloody gob onto the floor. "You will never have this guild." Seething and spitting, he pointing a trembling finger toward Naruto, imperiously. "I would sooner die by my own hand before I give it to a sympathetic fool like you. Is that your final answer?" Naruto breathed deep of the sunlight, replenishing his strength. "The Magic Council will be here any moment now. Once I defeat you, I'll tell them the truth about what's transpired here. And from there, well, it's either the grave or the gallows for someone like you." "I am not defeated yet, brat." The Dragon Slayer inclined his head. "You are a tough one, Gigi." He grinned. "That should have killed you." His shoulders slumped, the effects of his transformation slipping away from him like smoke. "Thankfully I still have one more trick up my sleeve. Now, I longer need this form, so if you'll excuse me, I'd like to wrap things up with this last attack." He clenched the wrist of his right arm, muscles bulging at the sudden effort. "Watch closely now. You'll only get to see this once." "What?" "It's over." Naruto cocked his fist backward, ready to deliver the final blow. "This, my ultimate technique." There were no flames to be found in his fist anymore. No grand explosion of light and shadow as the muscle of his right arm contracted, building up a titanic amount of power. What manner of sorcery was this? A simple punch? Gemma raised his arm, nonplussed. Surely he would be able to stop such a strike. Surely he did not mean to defeat him with such a simple blow. Naruto erupted forward, arm cocked, knuckles clenched, a wide, triumphant grin tugging at his every feature. "My wife is number one." Punch. As if such a punch could harm him. He would block it, of course, and then he would break this boy, break his family, break everything he held dear. He would make him suffer in recompense for this temerity, for this out-of-hand defiance. He would suffer and bawl and beg and wish for death, and he would not be granted it until Gemma saw fit. Oh yes, he would block this punch, and then he did not block it. Could not, as it powered through his guard and collided with his chin. It felt as though two individuals had struck him as one, as though another were there, her fist striking him, alongside that of the mighty sun god. What sorcery was this? Was he seeing things? How could such a thing be? How could Colthy have such power? Event as the great master Gemma reeled from the naming of the attack, so too could not hope to stand before the awesomeness of the punch. His jaw shattered, bones splintering beneath the sheer awesomeness of the unstoppable strike. He struggled to cling to consciousness, to his power, but to no avail. Naruto struck him again, and the last tenuous thread to his power and his guild finally snapped. His broken body slumped down to the broken floor, and the last sight he saw was that of the sun god basking in the sun. Turning as the clatter of footsteps reached his ears, as Lahar and a platoon of rune knights finally arrived on the scene. Words and pleasantries were exchanged, prompted by a series of hands being laid upon his body. Gemma's body. He felt himself dragged away from his guild, from all he'd strove for. He saw his daughter, through eyes swollen shut and suddenly, standing by Naruto's side, and he understood why she had not come to his defense during the battle. He'd been betrayed. Betrayed, beaten, broken in every possible way, and still his only thought was thus. Such power. Kana Alberona, fourth master of fairy tale. You belong to me. Naruto stifled a yawn with the back of his hand. But he was sucking bored. Nearly a week had passed since the near destruction of the Saber-Tooth Guild. Only a wee, and he'd been sitting here in the interrogation room for what felt like an eternity. This dull, drab white room, padded at the wall and hardened at the floor, supposedly created just to nullify his own magical powers. Any restraints they attempted to provide melted into slag before they could clamp them on him. And so he'd sat here, drumming his fingers against the table, wondering what was happening in the outside world. They'd said precious little to him thus. They hadn't even bothered to take his statement before throwing him in here. And so he'd sat, twiddling his thumbs, his senses sprout out to detect the happening beyond the room. He was the only guest in this underground chamber. There were no soul to hear his words, nor his exasperation. Solitary confinement. Were they trying to intimidate? If so, their plans were doomed to failure. The only woman that truly intimidated him was his wife and her wicked wrath, and both were fair and away from here. But he was not entirely cut off from the outside world as they thought. He was a wizard saint for a reason, after all. As he slept he dreamed, and as he dreamed, he found himself far removed from the dreadful dreary world with its iron bars and shackles upon reality. As he slept, he dreamed, and as he dreamed, he reached out to his wife, mile away in Magnolia Town. He touched her mind in slumber, communing to her everything that had happened over the last 7 days, and his own unfortunate confinement. And that wasn't all. He felt Kana resist at first, felt her surprise, her anger as she realized he was imprisoned. So when the door finally flung itself open, jarring him from his sleep, the sun god was in less than an amicable mood. I was having the best dream of my fucking life, Naruto growled. He took a deep breath to compose himself and folded his hands together upon the table. So, what can I do for you, head captain of the custody enforcement unit? Standing before him was a man he'd seen many times in the last 7 years, Lahar, leader of the Rune Knights. The two knew one another well, and under more pleasant circumstances, he would have been happy to see the dark-haired mage. Alas, Naruto wasn't feeling particularly pleasant at the moment. Hello, Lahar offered a wan smile. Naruto. Sue up. If Naruto wanted to, he could have been quite amiable with this man. But he didn't want to amiable. He wanted to get the hell out of this room. He wanted to be free of whatever schemes Minurva had planned. He wanted to get back to his family, hold his wife and child in his arms and take the former over and over and over again until they were both sated. He was in no mood to sit here and listen to some council flunky flaunt what he thought he knew of him, of the sun god. You've been quite busy over the last 7 years. The leader of the Rune Knights began, pulling up a chair as he laid a thick manila folder down upon the table. Naruto didn't even bother to inquire. He knew whose file that was, and he wasn't about to take the bait like some stupid fish. It was his file. A lifelong list of his accomplishments, from his very first job to the chaos he'd wrought last week. He was pleased to see that the folder was a great deal thicker than he last remembered. I've heard quite a lot about you as of late. With some effort, the dark-haired captain unfurled the folder. The table quivered from the effort. More than I would have liked. Oh really? Lahar inclined his head in a short nod and immediately launched into a list of his more sordid accomplishments. Consorting with the master of fairy tale. Conspiring to take down Saber-Tooth from within. Oh you dirty bitch, work the shaft? Excuse you? Sorry. The Dragon Slayer apologized, although he really didn't feel sorry at all. I like to dirty talk when someone doesn't have the balls to tell me himself. Perhaps I should just skip to my point. Lahar sighed. He pressed a gloved hand against the folder for emphasis. Uzumaki Naruto, I'll be frank. You've thrown a hot potato into the council's lap. Gurindoma wants to have you executed on behalf of the council for inciting such chaos. And on behalf of me, he can shut the fuck up? Naruto growled back. I'm trying to have a serious conversation with you here. The man frowned. Oh. Naruto snickered, exposing fangs in a glistening grin so sinister that it actually left the man quivering. So am I. And I'm failing. And I'm sorry for that. It's just that I'm so agitated. The words darkened alongside his visage as he leaned forward, blue eyes blazing like azure flames. Because this dumb little shit strolled into my room, woke me up from the best fucking dream ever and is trying to impress reason upon me, like I'm his alcoholic father. Before Lahar could open his mouth to protest, Naruto had placed 2 fingers to the man's forehead, eyes blazing red. Be a sport and let daddy get another beer, would you? The dark-haired mage could only frown as his surroundings burst into white. What are you? Lahar blinked as he found himself standing outside the cell block. One moment he'd been sitting across from one of the most powerful mages to ever exist. The next, he was right back where he started. His folder gone, alongside the keys. The keys. He scrambled back to Sun God's cell, silently cursing himself for his ineptitude. Foolish. He'd thought the room had dampened the man's magic to the point of non-existence, leaving him soft and weak, powerless within the confines of those 4 walls. He'd been wrong. Terribly, horribly wrong. He'd probably already escaped by now. He reached the door and flung it open, gasping for breath. Naruto grinned back at him, a mug of rum clutched tightly in one hand, keys in the other. The Dragon Slayer raised his glass in greeting and took a hearty drink. An errant thought sent the keys flying through the air at Lahar. The man grabbed at them with fumbling fingers. Incredulous, he demanded an explanation from the grinning wizard saint. How did you? That would be telling. Naruto smiled. Did you really think I'd shown the council all of my abilities? Those prejudiced bastards, who eliminate anyone for stepping even an inch out of line. He scoffed, cuting Lahar off once again. No, I was never trapped here. I could have left any time I pleased. I only stayed to hear what charges you had to level against me. And apparently, they're bullshit. But I'm not some pet mage for the council to toy with, the blonde admonished further as he circled the table, indicating the padded walls surrounding them. See this? He snapped his fingers and was gone, reappearing a hand's breadth behind Lahar. I can go wherever I want, do whatever I want, whenever the hell I want, and there's not a damn thing you can do about it. He drained his glass in a single gulp and slammed it down upon the table, sending the folder jumping into the air. The council would be wise to remember that. Now, let's make 3 things clear. What? I'm not apologizing. I was in the right. 3, and here he stood, eyes ablaze. If those bastards on the council try to use my wife as leverage against Mule, it won't be pretty. He made no mention of his daughter. Best for Gurindoma not to know his weakness. I'm not apologizing. He clarified further, flinging himself back into the chair. Read me my rights so I can get the hell out of here. Lahar sighed. A slow, wry smile stole its way over his face. Having a family really has changed you, hasn't it, Naruto-san? The blonde snorted. Not for the better, obviously. Quite frankly, I think it's made me a bit of an asshole. And you weren't one to begin with? I object to such a statement. Naruto groused as Lahar reclaimed the seat opposite him. You seem to have planned for such an event. The leader of the reunites slowly shuffled the papers on his desk, oblivious to the blonde's consternation. We found a recording lacrima on your person. It supports your story. You were attacked first. However, and here his face did darken, it fails to explain your use of lethal force. I didn't have much choice. The sun god shrugged, regarding his old friend blackly once again. Orga and Rufus were trying to kill me at the time. If I held back, there was a very good chance I wouldn't be sitting here right now. He straightened in the chair, unable to suppress the slightest shiver. I wasn't about to let Gemma rape Yukino either. It wasn't as if he loved her or it. He did, but not like that. She was like a little sister to him. A cute little sister. He'd sooner tear off his right arm than see her come to harm. Honestly, she was probably one of the reasons he'd stayed in the first place. If not for her and Rogue, he'd probably have left the guild a long time ago. Yes, about that, Lahar continued, you'll be pleased to know she's safe and sound. Naruto sighed. In custody? With your wife. The blonde's frown did more than turn upside down. It was positively beatific. You cheeky dickwaffle. Lady Minurva has also vouched for you. Lahar continued, the slyest of smiles pulling at his mouth. I don't know what you did to enamor her so, but she posted your bail some hours ago. 1 million jewel. Quite the amount, wouldn't you agree? Naruto groaned, prompting a confused frown from his friend. Damn it. He'd forgotten all about Minurva. She wasn't going to leave him alone, certainly not now, not after he'd made his final decision. His time in solitary had given him just that, time to think. Sabretooth was his guild. He'd helped found it. It was like a child to him. His child. A indignant, disobedient child he thought he could goad into behaving so long as he was nearby. He'd been wrong. The guild had given him nothing but misery over the last 7 years, and it had nearly scarred Yukino for life. There could be no righting the wrongs that had corrupted this child of his. It was no longer his guild. He knew now where he belonged. Fairy tale. There was just one snag. Minurva. He'd hoped, prayed she would be content with taking her father's place as master and ruling over Sabretooth, assuming it wasn't disbanded. Apparently not. If she was willing to post the amount Lahar had mentioned, a small fortune, just to secure his release, then she doubtlessly had plans for him. Plans he wanted no part of. Is something wrong? Lahar asked. Sun God shook his head. Noit's nothing, a thought occurred to him. That reminds me, for whatever reason Sabretooth hasn't been disbanded? Lahar shook its head. No. Why the hell not? You've placed Gemma in critical condition, but he'll likely spend the rest of his life in prison for his crimes. Most of the guild members responsible for attacking you were also apprehended. He tapped at the folder, in an errant thought, his eyes distant and cold, fraught with concern. I won't lie to you, Naruto-san. It will be a significantly smaller Sabretooth that takes place in the games this year. You murdered 2 of their best mages, and those that remain are doubtless to seek vengeance. His voice turned to flint as he spoke. Should they attempt something like this again, we of the Magic Council will. No, don't bother. Ha! Naruto was staring down at the table, his hands clutched hard into its surface, white-knuckled against the wood. Flames roared high in his eyes. If they try something like this again, you won't have to worry. His words were soft, deadly so. Lahar blinked. I'm afraid I don't understand. Because if they're foolish enough to come after me a second time, I'll wipe them out. The sun god promised, voice black as the darkest night. There won't be anything left to arrest but ashes. Why, you can't be serious? Lahar sputtered out. If you did such a thing, the council would do more than just strip you of your title. The full wrath of Aetheron would come down on you. Then he saw the look in the blonde's eyes. Felt the cracks spreading across the table. Sensed the killer intent stemming from the man's every pore. He was serious, Lahar realized. If Sabretooth ever threatened Naruto or his family again, the Dragon Slayer would exterminate the lot of them without hesitation. Heaven help whomever threatened them, because nothing short of a blast from the Ether Ion would stop this man from taking his vengeance. Perhaps not even that. Lahar shuddered at the thought of the weapon being fired again. You're truly serious about this, aren't you? Naruto's gaze spoke volumes. It was his title that had saved him this time. Next time, Kami forbid, there would be no certainties. So I'm free to go? Naruto asked. Yes. Lahar rose from his chair and turned to unlock the door. One more thing. Your wife is waiting for you. Naruto froze, rooted in place by the man's words. He turned, slowly, presenting his old acquaintance with a slow smile spread across his face. In that moment, Lahar could see just how much Naruto truly loved his wife more than anything in the world. It was there in his eyes, in his smile, in the way he held himself. If it was for her, he'd walk straight through hell with that very same smile. He'd burn for her, just as he was burning with love and aroused even now. You mean she's here? Kana's head snapped up as the sound of crisp footfalls reached her ears. She'd arrived hours ago via airship, thanks in part to Blue Pegasus. Ichiya owed her a favor, one she'd been swift to call on upon finally learning the location of her husband. She was tired of secrecy, tired of waiting. 7 years of happiness and sorrow, of hiding in the dark, of letting her little girl grow up without a father. 7 years of pain, a pain so terrible she thought she'd die, finally ended here today. The moment Naruto contacted her, conveyed to her his location, she'd been up and out the door, leaving Cornelia in the care of Biska and Alzak. Like hell she'd trust Gray with her kid. Now she stood in the halls of the capital, awaiting her husband's return. The guards had refused her passage any further than the lobby, and so here she was, waiting, ears straining for the slightest sound of steps. When she heard them she knew. She simply knew. She felt his shock from across the room, radiating outward in waves. Lahar bit back a smile as he bid the guards let the wizard saint pass, and he himself moved out of the man's way. And just in time too, because the card user launched herself at the blonde faster than any magical bullet could ever hope to, her arms wrapping around his neck in a loving hug. Naruto stiffened only for an instant, surprise scrawling across his every feature, then he grabbed her up in his arms and whirled her around, saying her name over and over as if he wanted to hear it forever. Kana. A moment. The run of a sandglass. A sliver of time. How long? Kana Alberona could not have said. But when she emerged from that cocoon of safety where nothing mattered but that she was safe and loved within the circle of arms, the guards were still gawping at the two of them, at this scene, straight out of a fairy tale. The irony was not lost on her. She blinked as he reached down to touch her face, his fingers cradling her cheek gently, fearfully, almost as if he had to be certain of it, terrified she would vanish into a dream. Then he rushed forward, snatching her up in his arms, kissing Kana Alberona with an urgency that almost overwhelmed her. Kana felt the tears before she realized she was crying. Tears of joy. Of relief. He was burning hot, even in the warm afternoon, and when their lips parted, he halted once more, holding her fearfully as if they stood on a precipice. Kana reached up and gently touched his cheek as he had, and was surprised to feel tears there. She smiled, not all harsh and edges as before, but softer, teasing. And then Naruto leaned in and kissed Kana again, slower this time. He dared to move his lips over hers, to feel her shudder against him, to taste her tongue over his lips were soft, warm, and oh so inviting. She crumpled into him, the anger leaching from her features. Oh Kamikami. Mine. Kana couldn't help it, she hissed out the word between breaths, fingers scrabbling to remove his armor, fisting in his hair. You're mine. Yours. Naruto whispered into her ear. He'd check on Yukino later. For now, there was only her. Only Kana. Always yours. Always. Death leaves a heartache no one can heal, love leaves a memory no one can steal.